the ice and fire demon god of Hogwarts. This video is purely for entertainment and does not infringe on copyrights or laws. The rights to the novel and image belong to the original author. We do not claim ownership. Don't like waiting and want to listen to this fanfic in full now? Subscribe to our Patreon, where you'll find the best fanfics. Chapter 276, The Quidditch World Cup. Lin En looked at the clover in the air, and the alchemical contact lenses he always wore in front of his pupils flashed a glimmer of light, and the clover was rapidly enlarged in Lin En's eyes. After the clover was enlarged to a certain extent, Lin En found that the clover was actually composed of countless little people wearing red vests and mustaches. Each little person who made up the clover held a small golden or green lamp, and the huge clover was made up of these lights. At this time, the golden rain fell on the audience, and the wizards were surprised to find that it was actually a piece of gold coins. Irish leprechauns. Through the gold coins falling from the sky, Lin En identified the identities of the little people in the air. They were a kind of creature called Irish leprechauns. They could create a large number of gold coins through the magic in their blood, but these gold coins were like the essence of their magic. After the magic power in them was exhausted, they would disappear. Therefore, it is illegal to pay with gold coins made by Irish leprechauns in the magic world, because they are not real money. However, not all wizards can recognize these Irish leprechauns, just like Ron, who is frantically fighting with those wizards for the gold coins on the ground. Ron happily came back with a handful of gold coins and stuffed them into Harry's hands. He said happily, "Here you go. Return your panoramic telescope. Now you have to buy me a Christmas present." Earlier, when Harry and the Weasley family passed by those vendors, Harry bought Ron a panoramic telescope in the name of giving Christmas presents in advance. Therefore, after getting these gold coins, Ron did not keep them for himself, but gave them all to Harry. It's a pity that he didn't know that these were gold coins made by Irish leprechauns, and they would disappear after a while because of the exhaustion of magic power. At this time, the Irish leprechauns threw the gold coins and fell to the opposite side of the villa on the field, sitting cross-legged, ready to watch the game. With the disappearance of the huge clover, Ludo Bagman spoke again to host the game. Ludo announced loudly, "Now, ladies and gentlemen, please give a warm welcome to the Bulgarian Quidditch national team. I introduce Dimitrov to you all." As Ludo's voice fell, a figure wearing red clothes riding a flying broom flew into the stadium from an entrance below. He was so fast that only a shadow was left in the air. When he slowly stopped in the air, the supporters of the Bulgarian Quidditch national team all cheered enthusiastically for him. Ludo continued to shout, "Ivanova." Before Ludo finished speaking, the second figure wearing a bright red robe flew out. "Zoglav. Levski. Vokanov. Vokov. Next is Crumb." Ludo shouted continuously, and when he said the last name, he paused slightly, and then burst into an even more intense shout. "It's him. It's him." In the box, Ron shouted loudly, as if he had seen his idol, and his eyes followed Crumb's figure through the panoramic telescope. As Ron shouted vigorously, everyone subconsciously looked in the direction of Crumb. Victor Crumb on the field was dark and thin, with grayish-yellow skin, a big hooked nose and two dark thick eyebrows. He looked like a huge eagle. If it weren't for the information he registered for the game, no one would believe that he was only 18 years old. Now, please welcome the Irish Quidditch national team. The players who are playing are Canali, Ryan, Troy, Millette, Moran, Quigley, and Lindsay. After all the players of the Bulgarian Quidditch national team appeared on the field, Ludo began to shout out the names of the players of the Irish Quidditch national team. At this time, 7 blurry green figures flew to the field. These players were all riding firebolts, and their names were embroidered with silver silk threads on the broom handles of the firebolts. And our referee today, the well-respected president of the International Quidditch Federation, Hassan Mustafa, who flew all the way from Egypt. As Ludo shouted, a short, thin wizard wearing a pure golden robe that matched the color of the stadium slowly walked into the stadium. As the referee released the quaffle, bludger and golden snitch, and blew the silver whistle, the grand game officially began. This Quidditch World Cup is indeed a world-class competition. The competition between the teams participating in this game is naturally not as trivial as the House Cup of Hogwarts School of Witchcraft and Wizardry. As the two teams competed with all their strength, various Quidditch skills were displayed in front of the wizards, giving the wizards who came to watch the game a feast for the eyes. And when Crumb used his signature Ronski feint, the whole audience burst into cheers and exclamations. Of course, when Lindsay of the Irish Quidditch national team failed to react to Crumb's Ronski feint and fell to the ground, the supporters of the Irish Quidditch national team also groaned. After Lindsay woke up and said that he could continue the game continued. However, when the score between the Irish Quidditch national team and the Bulgarian Quidditch national team reached 130:10, the game gradually became unscrupulous. In the court, the goalkeeper of the Bulgarian Quidditch national team was the first to commit a foul and elbowed the opponent's pursuer. The referee Mustafa blew the whistle and let the Irish Quidditch national team take a penalty kick. At the same time, the mascots of both sides, the Vila and the Irish Leprechauns, provoked each other. The Vila even danced on the court, using their own charm to interfere with the actions of the other side. However, the players of the Irish Quidditch national team were not disturbed, but the referee of this match, Hassan Mustafa, landed in front of these Vilas, flexed his limbs, showed his muscles, and excitedly stroked his beard. Seeing this scene, Ludo Bagman, who was in charge of commentating the game, sighed and said, "Oh, this won't do. Can anyone go up and slap the referee?" As Ludo's voice fell, a field doctor blocked his ears with his hands, rushed into the field, and kicked the referee Mustafa's calves hard several times, finally making him come back to his senses. The referee Mustafa looked very embarrassed. He yelled loudly at the Vilas, and under the referee Mustafa's shouting, the Vilas were forced to stop dancing. They all looked at the referee Mustafa, their faces full of dissatisfaction. Looking at everything that happened on the field, Lin shook his head and sighed while covering his face. It seems that he has to retract his previous opinion on the Quidditch World Cup. It turns out that it is not just the Hogwarts School of Witchcraft and Wizardry that is being treated as a joke, but the entire wizarding world. Don't you see? Even the Quidditch World Cup, the grandest event in the entire wizarding world, has now become such a joke. Please give me rewards and monthly tickets. Chapter 277 Death Eaters Carnival. At this time, Ludo Bagman, who was in charge of the commentary, sighed and said, "Maybe we made a mistake. Mustafa actually wanted to send the mascot of the Bulgarian Quidditch national team back home. Oh, we have never seen such a scene. Oh, this game may become uncivilized." Just as Ludo Bagman said, this Quidditch World Cup became more and more violent and uncivilized. The batsmen on both sides kept waving their bats. They didn't care whether they were hitting the bludger or the wizards on the opposite side. A good game turned into an air battle. The players of the two teams were like a fight between gangsters. They fought while competing. I don't know why, but I suddenly feel that those guys in our Slytherin Quidditch team are still too civilized. Lin said speechlessly to Irina beside him. Irina also looked indescribable. She never expected that the most grand event in the magic world would be turned into this. After an unknown amount of time, the Quidditch match that was gradually going wrong ended because Crumb caught the golden snitch. In the end, the score between the Irish national Quidditch team and the Bulgarian national Quidditch team was fixed at 170:160. Even though the golden snitch had a full 150 points, it could not make up for the 160 point gap between the two sides. In the Bulgarian national Quidditch team, even though Victor Crumb had an unparalleled talent as a seeker, it was obviously not something he could easily do in this Quidditch World Cup, where there were so many hidden talents. After all, if Crumb's 6 players could be less pitfalls and let the opponent score fewer goals, then the Golden Snitch's 150 points would be enough for the Bulgarian national Quidditch team to turn defeat into victory. After the award ceremony, the wizards who watched the game left one after another and returned to the camp to rest. However, after returning to the magic tent, Lin and Irina did not go to rest, but instead checked something with a serious face. "Irina, your weapon," Lin En said loudly in the magic tent. He took out the ice crystal spear that he had made for Irina and threw it to Irina, who was opening a suitcase not far away. Irina grabbed the ice crystal spear with her left hand, and her right hand opened the suitcase on the ground. Almost at the moment when the suitcase was opened, a purple figure suddenly jumped out of the suitcase, wrapped around Irina's wrist, and did not move. This is Irina's little curled winged demon. Although there are so many magical animals in Irina's suitcase, it seems that the one who can help Irina the most in the battle is this little curled winged demon with both offensive and defensive capabilities. After taking the ice crystal spear and releasing the little curled winged demon, Irina put on the alchemical equipment refined by Lin En one by one. The same thing happened to Lin on the other side. After putting on all the alchemical equipment, Lin waved his wand to check the power of the demon on his arm. After confirming that there was no problem with the power of the demon, he hid his body again. The Death Eaters will start the parade later. If I remember correctly, Barty Crouch Jr. should be among them. He has the magic level equivalent to that of an elite aura, and is the biggest threat to us on this trip. Lin said so. The Death Eaters participating in the parade tonight will all be Voldemort's helpers in the future. Even if their own magic level is not up to par, the background of the pureblood family behind them can provide great help to Voldemort. Therefore, if Lin and Irina can stop them in this carnival of Death Eaters, or even kill them, then Voldemort will have a harder time in the future. After all, after Voldemort's fall more than a decade ago, the most loyal Death Eaters have been sent to Azkaban prison, and the richest Death Eaters will appear in tonight's parade. Just as Lin En and Irina were doing the final check, there was a noisy sound outside the magic tent, and it seemed that many wizards were rushing here. After noticing this, Lin En and Irina both looked stern. They hurriedly walked out of the magic tent. Since their magic tent was not far from the entrance of the camp, the Death Eaters parade had not started for long before they were approaching their location. Looking towards the entrance of the camp, the two could see a group of hooded wizards crowded together. These wizards wore masks on their faces, making it impossible for others to distinguish their appearance. Above their heads, there were 4 struggling figures floating in the air. The 4 people were twisted into various weird shapes, as if the masked wizards on the ground were puppeteers, and the people above them were marionettes. These 4 people were controlled by invisible ropes that emerged from the wand into the air. Among these 4 figures, 2 were very small, and they looked like young children who had just been born. At this time, more masked wizards joined the marching team. They laughed loudly and pointed their wands at the floating bodies above. As the parade grew larger, tents collapsed under the crowded crowd. Some people even deliberately set the roadside tents on fire with fire spells. The screams in the camp became louder when the floating people passed over the burning tents and were suddenly illuminated by the fire. Lin and Irina recognized one of them as Mr. Roberts, the camp manager they had just met last night. The other 3 people seemed to be his wife and children. A Death Eater below used his wand to turn Mrs. Roberts upside down, causing her pajamas to fall down, revealing a large pile of colorful underwear. The Death Eaters below screamed and booed happily, while Mrs. Roberts struggled to cover her body. Not only that, the youngest child who was hanging in the air, now 60 feet above the ground, began to spin like a top, his head limply tilted to this side, then to that side. Obviously he had died. Beast. Seeing this scene, both Lin and Irina gnashed their teeth and cursed. The child killed by the Death Eaters looked less than 10 years old, but he lost his most precious life at such a young age. The death of a young life completely aroused the anger of the two. Avada Kedavra. Irina roared and waved her wand. The murderous intent against the Death Eaters turned into a dark green beam of light that burst out and blasted towards a masked Death Eater in the distance with the force of thunder. Chapter 278. Let the power of this forbidden magic be seen by the world again. Before the Death Eater could react, the green beam of light hit him fiercely. In an instant, the Death Eater's eyes became empty, and his soul was wiped out by the killing curse. Bang! The Death Eater's body fell to the ground with a muffled sound, and it was this muffled sound that attracted the attention of other Death Eaters who were marching. Try not to use the unforgivable curse. I won't have time to put on the pure heart for you in the battle later. Lin whispered, and with a wave of his left hand, a ball of fiend fire condensed out of thin air and threw it towards the group of Death Eaters. Hearing Lin's words, Irina, who was blinded by anger, suddenly woke up. She mobilized the ice power in her body to force herself to stay awake with extreme cold. On the other side, these Death Eaters looked at the fiendfy that turned into cheetahs, wild wolves and other shapes, and pounced on them, and they were scared to death. However, even though their magic skills were not very high, as high-ranking members of a pure-blood family, they still had some understanding of black magic such as fiendfire and its counter-curse. All curses end. Before the fiendfy spread to their location, these Death Eaters pointed their wands at the ground without hesitation, and chanted the spell in unison. The invisible light wave spread out. Perhaps the all curses end curse of a Death Eater was not enough to extinguish Lin's fiendfy, but the power of dozens of all curses end curse intertwined together had already reached a qualitative change. The red and black fiendfy was annihilated in the air, and a figure flashing with ice blue light shuttled behind the group of Death Eaters at a speed that was difficult to see with the naked eye without the Death Eaters noticing. The ice blue figure stopped behind the Death Eaters camp and revealed the other party's face. The ice blue figure was Irina. Irina's wand had been put back into her waist, and her right hand was tightly holding an ice crystal spear flashing with a cold light. Her body was covered by a thick ice armor, and even her face was covered by a veil of ice mist. Crucia. Avada Kedavra. Tear to pieces. At this time, the Death Eaters quickly attacked Lin. They had no time to care about the 4 muggles above their heads. After losing the support of the levitation spell, the 4 muggles fell to the ground one after another. Looking at the spells flying from all directions, Lin chuckled, and a ball of black and red flames spread out from his body. As the black and red flames spread, all the spells fired at Lin were blocked by the black and red flames, and extinguished the moment they came into contact with the black and red flames. Seeing this strange flame, the eyes of the group of Death Eaters changed obviously. They were proficient in black magic, and could naturally recognize that this flame was not fiendfy, but apart from fiendfy, they had never seen a magical flame that could devour spells or even annihilate spells. Lin En flipped his left hand up and down, and the black-red flames immediately swept towards the group of Death Eaters. Let the power of the forbidden magic be seen by the world again, Lin En said softly, and the black-red flames burned more fiercely. Yes, the black-red flames were not the fiend fire, but the forbidden magic fire that Lin En refined with alchemy and the fire spell. The forbidden magic fire with the power of the forbidden magic was naturally not restrained by the magic spells of these Death Eaters. Just when these Death Eaters thought they were about to be burned to death by the forbidden magic fire, they were surprised to find that, after approaching them within a range of 10 meters, the forbidden magic fire did not move forward, but instead spread around them, trapping them in this circle of fiercely burning black-red flames. Cage. After the forbidden magic fire enveloped them, this word appeared in the minds of these Death Eaters. These Death Eaters couldn't believe that the wizard who came from nowhere didn't kill them immediately when he had the chance to kill them, but wanted to imprison them and play cat and mouse games with them. Thinking of this, anger appeared in the eyes of these Death Eaters. When Voldemort had not yet fallen, they were the ones who broke into other people's homes at night and played cat and mouse games. Once upon a time, they, the Death Eaters, were the nightmares of ordinary wizards, and they were the existence that could scare children away from crying at night. But now, Voldemort has fallen for only more than 10 years, and wizards have already looked down on them, the Death Eaters? Exclamation mark. In fact, it was not that Lin En wanted to play tricks on them, but the strength of the forbidden magic fire lies in its forbidden magic power, not the high temperature of its flame. The temperature of the forbidden magic fire itself is not much higher than that of ordinary magic flames. If Lin En controlled the forbidden magic fire to attack these Death Eaters, perhaps the forbidden magic fire could burn some of them to death, but more Death Eaters would surely break out of the fire circle and escape. Especially among these Death Eaters, there is Barty Crouch Jr., whose magic level is not lower than that of the Elite Aura. If Barty Jr. escapes, he can even use magic to interrupt Lin En's control of the fire. Therefore, using the forbidden magic fire to create a magic sealed field so that the Death Eaters in the fire circle cannot use magic is the best way to use the forbidden magic fire. Don't forget that Lin En is not fighting alone now. Irina slowly passed through the flames with an ice crystal spear in her hand. The black and red flames licked the ice armor covering Irina's body surface, but the forbidden magic fire that could distinguish between enemies and friends under Lin En's control would not hurt Irina. Instead, after touching Irina, it quickly avoided it and retracted the forbidden magic power imposed on Irina. When Irina walked into the fire circle, she became the only wizard whose magic power was not affected in the fire cage, while the rest of the Death Eaters were undoubtedly trapped beasts in the cage. Seeing the little witch coming in front of them, these Death Eaters showed their claws. Even if they couldn't use magic, they didn't believe that dozens of Death Eaters couldn't kill an underage little witch here. However, a Death Eater who was at the back of the group of Death Eaters looked at Irina with a look of disbelief. Not only that, there was a hint of timidity in his eyes. "Kill this witch," a Death Eater shouted loudly, and he rushed towards Irina first, and his right hand clawed towards Irina's neck. Chapter 279 Barty Crouch Jr. Chapter 279 Barty Crouch Jr. Irina remained calm, while looking at the Death Eater approaching her quickly. Seeing that Irina did not react, the Death Eater laughed loudly, thinking that the little witch was scared silly by him. Even the dozens of Death Eaters behind him smiled, thinking that they had won. Only the two Death Eaters standing at the end of the team had a solemn look in their eyes, and a sense of foreboding filled their hearts. In fact, the premonition of the two Death Eaters was correct. When the Death Eater was only 1 meter away from Irina, Irina waved the ice crystal spear in her hand expressionlessly, and swung it in front of her. In a flash, a blood mark suddenly appeared on the throat of the Death Eater, and the other party's wild laughter also stopped abruptly. The Death Eater covered his neck in disbelief. He wanted to say something, but blood gushed out of his mouth. Soon, his body fell down, and as his hand covering his throat loosened powerlessly, a column of bright red blood spurted out, staining the ground red. Seeing this scene, the group of Death Eaters subconsciously stepped back a few steps and looked at Irina in horror. After killing the Death Eater, Irina did not stop her actions. Her ice blue eyes were full of coldness, and her sharp eyes pierced the Death Eaters to retreat continuously. But just when these Death Eaters retreated to the other end of the fire circle and kept a distance of nearly 100 meters from Irina, thinking that they were safe, Irina moved again. I saw a ray of ice blue light passing through the hall, crossing the distance of 100 meters in an instant, and piercing the bodies of 3 Death Eaters. Irina's figure appeared behind the group of Death Eaters, and the 3 Death Eaters pierced by the ice blue light had a blood hole on their chests, and their bodies were gradually covered by frost, turning into ice sculptures. Irina turned around, her mouth slightly raised, and she gently snapped her left hand. The next moment, the 3 ice sculptures shattered, and the Death Eaters in them were all dead. Even children under the age of 10 are slaughtered wantonly. "You Death Eaters are really heartless." Irina's cold voice came out, and she showed a beautiful smile, but this smile fell into the eyes of the Death Eaters, but it made them feel cold in their hearts. "Disarm you." However, just as Irina was talking to herself, a red beam of light came out from the Death Eaters camp and headed straight for Irina. A young figure appeared at the end of the Death Eaters team. He was one of the 2 Death Eaters who showed a solemn look before Irina took action. His action was not even expected by the Death Eaters around him. After all, in this fire circle that sealed the magic of wizards, their magic was suppressed by an inexplicable force. Naturally, they would not expect that this young Death Eater could release a spell. The red beam hit Irina's chest, but was deflected by the ice armor that flashed with ice blue light. Irina looked at the Death Eater who released the disarming spell in surprise. After seeing the other party's young face, she was sure of his identity. Barty Crouch Jr. Yes, among this group of Death Eaters with generally low magic skills, it is probably only Barty Crouch Jr. whose magic skills are comparable to those of elite auras, who can release spells surrounded by the forbidden magic fire. Seeing his spell being deflected, Barty Jr. in the Death Eater camp almost bit his teeth. First, the inexplicable black and red flame suppressed his magic power, making it difficult for him to even release a spell. Then, the little witch who came from nowhere killed everyone in the Death Eater camp. He finally mobilized the turtle-like magic power in his body to gather it into the wand and released a disarming spell that was less powerful than 1/10 of his usual power, but he couldn't even break the opponent's seemingly harmless ice armor. Barty Crouch was the biggest threat among the Death Eaters, but in order to ensure that the plot in Hogwarts Castle could proceed normally without any unforeseen and irreversible accidents, Lin and Irina agreed to let Barty live before taking action. Of course, Lin and Irina would not let the other party leave so easily. After Irina confirmed Barty's identity, she injected magic power into a metal ring on her left hand. At the same time, outside the circle of fire formed by the forbidden magic fire, an identical metal ring on Lin's hand began to heat up, as if reminding him of something. After feeling the heat from his hand, Lin's eyes also stayed on Barty crouch in the Death Eater camp. As Lin En waved his wand, his figure suddenly disappeared from the spot. After casting the disillusionment spell on himself, Lin En passed through the fire circle without anyone noticing, and came behind little Barty. Logically speaking, with little Barty's usual vigilance, even if Lin En tried his best to suppress the noise he made, he would be able to sense someone appearing behind him. But now little Barty's attention was all focused on Irina, who was killing people not far away, and he ignored the movement around him. That should not exist. Spirit of Soul. Looking at little Barty who was close at hand, Lin En pointed his wand at little Barty's head and chanted the spell softly. After hearing the sound behind him, little Barty's face changed drastically. He immediately turned around and kicked out. Who is it? However, little Barty did not kick anyone. He kept testing the air in front of him, but could not touch any invisible existence. In fact, after casting the Soul of Soul on little Barty, Lin En left the range of the fire circle at a very fast speed. By inserting an eye into Barty Jr. with the Soul Charm, and obtaining Barty Jr.'s vision, Lin and Irina can know Barty Jr.'s whereabouts at any time, and even get information about Voldemort through Barty Jr.'s vision. Keeping all the plots firmly in their own hands is the real purpose of Lin and Irina tonight. As for killing the Death Eaters and weakening Voldemort's power, that is just a side job for them. After all, their foresight of the original plot is their biggest advantage as time travelers, and keeping ahead of the intelligence is the key factor to their victory. Chapter 280. It turns out that the auras are on the Death Eater's side. In the fire circle formed by the forbidden magic fire, a killing was still going on. The ice crystal spear in Irina's hand swept out, and a streak of ice blue flew out from the tip of the spear, killing 4 or 5 Death Eaters in an instant. After retracting the spear, Irina stabbed it forward again, and the tip of the ice crystal spear spit out a spearlight several feet long, piercing the throat of another Death Eater. In less than 5 minutes, more than half of the Death Eaters imprisoned in the fire circle were killed or injured. At this moment, Barty, who was standing silently behind the Death Eaters, showed a look of determination in his eyes. He pointed his wand at his finger, and the next moment, the 5 fingers of his left hand broke and flew towards the direction of the forbidden magic fire. Then, Barty yelled, "Thunder explosion." As Barty finished speaking, the 5 fingers exploded like a bomb, and the airwaves that spread in all directions actually blew a gap in the fire circle formed by the forbidden magic fire. Seeing this scene, Lin En, who was outside the fire circle, couldn't help but reveal a look of surprise. The secret method Barty just used seemed to be the same as the explosion spell that Peter Pettigrew used at the cost of a finger in the case that framed Sirius more than 10 years ago. The explosion spell cast by this secret method does not require the wizard to mobilize the magic power in the body, but like muggles pulling the fuse of a grenade and throwing it out, it does not consume magic power. Because the 5 fingers of Barty that were cut off after the magic power contained in them was triggered by the secret method, have become a grenade similar to that of muggles. Therefore, the forbidden magic fire, which possessed the power of forbidden magic, could not suppress the release of this explosive spell. Instead, it was broken open by the airwave generated by the violent explosion. Looking at the forbidden magic fire that had been broken open, Lin En did not control the forbidden magic fire to fill the gap, but let little Barty escape from the gap in the fire circle in just a few seconds. He was not worried about little Barty's escape. After all, even if little Barty stayed in the fire circle waiting to die, Lin En and Irina would have to find a way to let him live in the end. Instead of worrying about how to let him go without letting him notice their deliberate actions, it would be better to let little Barty use his own power to break through Lin En's fire circle and escape with his own power. After all, people will never doubt themselves. At this time, little Barty, who escaped from the fire circle formed by the forbidden magic fire, had already regained control of his own magic power. He appeared more than 100 meters away with a phantom shift, and then looked here. He looked at Lin and Irina with a look of hatred in his eyes. The skeleton reappears. Barty shouted, pointing his wand in the air. After releasing the dark mark, he apparated again and left this place of trouble. A green light bloomed in the sky, and a thick green mist spread in the air, revealing a pattern of a python spitting out of a skull's mouth. Dark mark. Looking at the pattern that suddenly appeared in the air, this word appeared in Lin and Irina's minds at the same time. But in the next moment, Lin's face changed drastically, and he waved his wand quickly, and thousands of golden threads intertwined in the air at a very fast speed. Faint. 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 20 auras suddenly appeared not far from Lin. After seeing Lin appear under the dark mark, these auras cast a stunning spell at Lin without hesitation. 20 stunning spells flew out from all directions at the same time towards Lin. The stunning spells released by the auras were much more powerful than those released by the Death Eaters. The thick light blasted towards Lin with the force of thunder. At the same time, the golden threads in the sky quickly condensed into 5 alchemical arrays. Under the superpowered operation of the Devil's power, the huge amount of magic power was extracted in a very short time and turned into a force to resist the auras. Lin gently waved his right hand holding the magic wand, and the 5 alchemical arrays simultaneously shot out endless golden beams towards the auras. This terrifying golden beam was like a grand meteor shower, not only annihilating all the stunning spells that hit Lin, but also more golden beams shot towards the auras. However, in an instant, 7 or 8 auras were knocked away by the golden beams, and the whole person fell heavily 10 meters away. The remaining auras quickly released the armor charm, struggling to resist the golden beams emitted by the alchemical array, and occasionally waved their wands to chant spells to fight back. All this happened in a flash, and neither Lin nor the auras had time to see each other's faces before they had already completed 2 rounds of exchanges of fire. Wait, stop. That's a Hogwarts student, not the one who cast the dark mark. At this moment, a cry of surprise came from behind the auras, and Mr. Weirlie shouted loudly, trying to stop the auras from attacking Lin. Hearing Mr. Weirlie's words, the auras present were all stunned. They finally saw Lin's face clearly. He was a young wizard who looked a little immature. Mr. Weirlie, do you think that an underage wizard who is still studying at Hogwarts can fight back and forth with these 20 auras? Maybe the opponent just used means such as Polyjuice potion to change his appearance. At this time, a cold and emotionless voice came over. That was old Barty Crouch. Unlike old Barty, Mr. Weirlie, who was proficient in alchemy, could naturally tell that Lin's means of fighting back against those auras were not spells, but pure alchemy arrays. Mr. Weirlie was sure that, apart from Dumbledore, Lin was probably the only alchemist in the UK who could achieve such accomplishments. Mr. Weirlie said anxiously and angrily, "Are you confused, old Barty? He is clearly Lin Rowell, a student of Hogwarts. Don't forget that he and his classmates killed the 1,000-year-old basilisk 2 years ago." On the other side, Lin, who heard the conversation here, couldn't help but show some sarcasm in his eyes. I only heard Lin En say coldly, "I didn't expect that the auras of the Ministry of Magic not only did not attack the Death Eaters who caused the accident, but instead killed the underage wizards who bravely fought against the Death Eaters. I really learned a lot. It turns out that the Ministry of Magic is not on the side of the wizards, but is in cahoots with the Death Eaters. Please give me rewards and monthly tickets." Chapter 281 Old Batty on the Road. After hearing what Lin and Mr. Weirlie said, even if old Barty and the auras were ignorant, they should have understood that Lin was not the one who released the dark mark. Both parties put down their wands tacitly. Lin waved his hand to disperse the 5 alchemical circles around him, and the auras stopped attacking Lin. "Mr. O, since you said you are a warrior against the Death Eaters, then please tell me, where are those Death Eaters now?" Suddenly being accused of colluding with the Death Eaters by Lin, old Barty's face was obviously a little embarrassed. He hurriedly questioned Lin and tried to change the subject. Hearing this, the mockery in Lin's eyes became even stronger. Lin said lightly, "I think if Mr. Crouch's eyes were not blind, he should be able to see the battle going on there." As he said that, Lin pointed to the battle going on in the fire circle not far away, or in other words, it was a one-sided massacre. The moment Barty and the auras apparated, they exchanged fire with Lin. After the exchange of fire stopped, their attention was focused on Lin, the young wizard who could fight 20 at once. It was not until Lin pointed in the direction of Irina that the auras discovered the battle taking place in the fire circle. Barty and the 20 auras apparated to a small earthen slope, which allowed them to see everything that happened in the fire circle. Under the incredulous gaze of the 20 people, the dreaded Death Eaters fell one by one like lambs, to be slaughtered under Irina's killing spell of the Ice God. From the costumes of these Death Eaters, the old auras who had experienced the war against Voldemort in the past determined the identities of these Death Eaters. They drew their wands without hesitation and ran towards the fire circle. However, just as they arrived outside the fire circle and planned to knock down the Death Eaters with spells, they were horrified to find that their magic power was suppressed by an inexplicable force. Except for some elite auras, other auras couldn't even cast a spell. The same thing happened to old Barty, who ran to the outside of the fire circle with the auras. He looked anxiously and angrily in the direction of Lin En and asked, "What kind of power is this? Why is our magic suppressed? You know, magic is the lifeblood of wizards. If this power that can suppress wizards' magic spreads and is mastered by unscrupulous people, then the entire magic world may be destroyed." Seeing this, Lin En smiled and waved his left hand. The power of prohibiting magic that descended on old Barty and the auras suddenly disappeared, and the fire circle formed by the prohibition of magic fire also separated a path that could accommodate old Barty and these auras to enter. Lin chuckled and said, "Mr. Crouch, if you know me better, you should know the name of my teacher, Wallace and Green." Old Barty was stunned. Even if he didn't know much about alchemy, he had a certain understanding of Wallace and Green, the famous French alchemist who invented the forbidden magic stone. If Lin was a disciple of Wallace and Green, then it would make sense that Lin could master this power. Moreover, with the restraint of Mr. Green, Lin would not spread this power at will. At this time, after seeing the auras coming from outside the fire circle, Irina stopped. After the auras took over the scene, these Death Eaters were naturally no longer under the control of Lin and Irina. It was better to leave these troublesome things to these auras. However, after the previous killing, there are only 6 Death Eaters left out of the dozens. After seeing the arrival of the auras, the remaining 6 Death Eaters did not think of escaping, but surrendered to the auras, as if they had seen a savior, and almost hugged the auras' thighs and called Dad. Looking at the corpses of the Death Eaters lying on the ground and the 6 crying Death Eaters, old Barty looked at Irina, who was wearing ice armor with blood on it, and asked with difficulty, "These Death Eaters, did you kill them all?" Irina nodded gently and said, "Yes, sir. These Death Eaters were causing chaos in the camp, so I taught them some lessons." Hearing Irina's words, the remaining 6 Death Eaters almost cried. "You call this some lessons?" Exclamation mark. Since the arrival of this evil star, the other party has not given them a chance to reform. If the auras had not arrived earlier, I'm afraid they would all have died. Old Barty swallowed hard and waved his finger to instruct an aura to bind the 6 Death Eaters with special magic chains. After seeing that the only 6 remaining Death Eaters were arrested, Lin took back the forbidden magic fire and stored it back in his body. "Lin, can I call you that? With the power of your forbidden magic stone, these Death Eaters must not be able to release magic. In other words, the person who released the dark mark should not be among them. Can you tell me who released the dark mark? Or tell me the other person's appearance?" Old Barty walked over and whispered to Lin. After experiencing so many shocks before, he would never dare to treat Lin as an underage wizard again. He looked at Lin and Irina as if he was looking at Dumbledore. After all, Lin En was able to fight against 20 auras, including several elite auras, by himself. It can be seen that Lin En's magic level must be above the elite auras. As for whether Lin En's magic power has reached the threshold of the Demon King level wizard, old Barty guessed that he had not, but he must be close. "I think you don't want to know the answer." Feeling the change in old Barty's attitude, Lin En's tone was no longer as indifferent and cold as before, and he said softly. Hearing this, old Barty suddenly had an ominous premonition in his heart. He dismissed the auras around him and said in a voice that only Lin En could hear, "You say it, I think I can accept it." Seeing old Barty's understanding, Lin En smiled slightly. In order not to change the plot of the original book, Lin En did not intend to expose little Barty's identity, and old Barty's action of dismissing the surrounding auras was undoubtedly in line with Lin En's idea. In this case, it would not be a big problem to tell old Barty, who had already guessed about little Barty's identity. So, Lin also whispered in a voice that only old Barty could hear, "I think you know that person too, Barty Crouch Jr. Chapter 282 I owe you a favor." Hearing the words Barty Crouch Jr., Barty Sr.'s eyes suddenly showed a look of surprise and anger, but soon, his emotions were well restrained. He bowed slightly to Lin and said, "Thank you for telling me this, Lin." Barty Sr. understood that the reason why Lin did not tell him the answer directly, but told him this after he dismissed those auras, was to prevent the matter from spreading. No matter what purpose Lin had in doing this, if Barty Sr.'s affairs were spread, then Barty Sr. would certainly be dismissed, and even the matter of his wife's substitution of a cat for a prince might be exposed. At that time, Barty Sr. would be equivalent to being thrown into the 18th level of hell, and would never be able to turn over again. Therefore, Lin was willing to tell him about Barty Sr.'s affairs in private, which was a favor to him. Thinking of this, Barty Sr. looked at Lin more kindly. "No need to say more, Mr. Crouch. After all, we don't want the magic world to be in chaos, right?" Lin said with a chuckle. Old Barty looked at Lin deeply and said, "I owe you a favor, Lin." After that, old Barty turned around, waved to the auras, and said loudly, "Collect the team, send those Death Eaters to trial, and also, thoroughly investigate the Dark Mark." Although old Barty was the director of the International Magic Exchange and Cooperation Department, and not the Aura's immediate superior, with the prestige accumulated over the years, the Auras still obeyed, and withdrew the team, apparating away with the 6 surviving Death Eaters. After the Auras left, Mr. Weasley ran over breathlessly. Following behind Mr. Weasley were Harry, Hermione, and the Weasley family, who looked worried. "Lin, Irina, are you alright?" Mr. Weasley checked Lin and Irina, who was walking slowly from a distance, and asked anxiously. Hearing this, Lin shrugged his shoulders and spread his hands, saying, "Don't worry, Uncle Weasley, the ones in trouble are the Death Eaters." Irina, who was walking over, also waved her wand to clean the blood on her body. She smiled and responded, "Lin is right." It was not until then that everyone saw the blood of the Death Eaters on Irina's ice armor, and following the direction of the blood flowing, when Irina came over, everyone saw the bodies of the Death Eaters lying on the ground. They could even see many frozen body parts and blood clots. Ugh. Seeing this horrifying scene, Harry, Ron, Hermione and Ginny, who had poor psychological endurance, all bent over and vomited, and even the older Weasley twins looked very ugly. Mr. Weasley's face was also not very good. He swallowed his saliva and showed the same indescribable look as old Barty before. "Did you kill all these Death Eaters?" Irina shook her head and said softly, "Not only me, but also thanks to Lin's support." Irina was telling the truth. If Lin hadn't used the forbidden magic fire to suppress the magic power of those Death Eaters, then she might be able to kill these Death Eaters, but it would definitely not be so easy. She might even be injured in the battle. Although Lin's presence in this battle was very low, the role he played in the battle was crucial. If it were put in a modern war, Lin's behavior of suppressing the magic power of the Death Eaters with the forbidden magic fire would be equivalent to shielding the enemy's electronic signals, making all the enemy's warships, missiles and other modern weapons lose their navigation, becoming blind and at the mercy of others. Thinking of how Lin had just resisted the joint attack of 20 auras by himself, and even suppressed them in turn, and thinking of how Irina had killed dozens of Death Eaters in that short battle of more than 10 minutes, Mr. Weasley looked at the two with shock. And after comparing their situation of being suppressed by Death Eaters everywhere, Mr. Weasley couldn't help but feel a little decadent. "Young people are formidable," Mr. Weasley said in shock. After solving the problem here, Mr. Weasley invited Lin and Irina to go to their tent to rest together, but they declined. Although the Ministry of Magic will not issue the door keys for the wizards to return to the place where they came from before the threat here is completely eliminated, Irina can make illegal door keys by herself. After watching the Weasley family leave, Irina rubbed an illegal door key with the destination being the entrance of Rowell Manor on the spot. "By the way, where is our tent?" Just as Irina was about to leave with Lin En, she suddenly remembered something. She hurriedly looked in the direction she came from, but could only see a pile of ashes after being burned by the flames. Irina's mouth pursed, and she immediately said with a crying voice, "It's over. My magic tent is gone. That was the Christmas gift my teacher gave me." "Hey, don't cry, Irina. I put away the magic tent when you cast the unforgivable curse on that Death Eater." Seeing that Irina was about to cry, Lin En quickly took out the magic tent from his pocket and said to Irina, as early as when Irina couldn't control her anger and attacked the Death Eater with a killing curse, Lin En was worried that the battle would affect this place, so he put away their magic tent in advance. After seeing the magic tent in Lin's hand, Irina finally burst into laughter. She reached out and patted Lin gently, saying resentfully, "You didn't tell me earlier. I almost lost face." Lin smiled without saying anything. With the illegal door key made by Irina, the two returned to Rao Manor. In 4 days, Hogwarts School of Witchcraft and Wizardry will start school, so Irina stayed in Rao Castle directly, waiting for the start of school. 3 days later, the two saw the news of the Quidditch World Cup reported in the Daily Prophet on the night of the game. The Ministry of Magic is panicking. Law and order are lax. Dark wizards are at large, bringing shame to the country. What the hell is this? Lin and Irina sat on the sofa and read a copy of the Daily Prophet together. After reading the content, the corners of their mouths twitched slightly. Which unscrupulous reporter wrote such an unrealistic report? Exclamation mark. However, after seeing the signature at the end of the article, Lin and Irina were relieved. Rita Skeeter. Well, if that's her, then this article makes perfect sense. Chapter 283. We need a controllable Ministry of Magic. Just as Lin was about to put away the Daily Prophet, Irina pointed to the last paragraph of the article and said with a smile, "How on earth did she manage to say such misleading words with completely correct facts?" Hearing this, Lin looked at the text that Irina pointed to. Those wizards were panicked and held their breath by the woods waiting for news, hoping to get comfort from the Ministry of Magic, but unfortunately, they were greatly disappointed. Shortly after the Dark Mark appeared, an official from the Ministry of Magic showed up and claimed that no one was hurt, but refused to reveal more. Whether his words are enough to quell the rumor that dozens of bodies were carried out of the woods an hour later remains to be seen. After reading this paragraph, Lin couldn't help but laugh out loud. Although the content recorded in this paragraph is almost the same as in the original book, the fact that dozens of bodies were carried out of the woods this time is not a rumor. However, those dozens of bodies were not those of the innocent wizards who were affected, but all of them were Death Eaters killed by Irina. Not long after, a clarification notice from the Ministry of Magic was issued. In the notice of the Ministry of Magic, the riot was initiated by the remnant of the Death Eaters, but fortunately, with the advanced awareness of the Ministry of Magic, the riot launched by the remnant of the Death Eaters was finally quelled with the help of 2 young wizards from Hogwarts School of Witchcraft and Wizardry. At the end of the notice, the Ministry of Magic also clarified again that no innocent wizards were harmed in the riot. Instead, most of the rioting Death Eaters were killed on the spot after warnings failed, and the remaining 6 were also arrested by the orders of the Ministry of Magic and will be sent to Azkaban prison to serve life imprisonment after trial. After reading the notice of the Ministry of Magic, Lin couldn't help but sneer and said, "The Ministry of Magic is really good at putting gold on its own face. I guess this should be Fudge's idea. This is obviously not the work of those people in the Ministry of Magic. Those stupid auras actually took action against you. I don't know where they got the face," Irina said indignantly. In fact, Irina didn't care about those reputations, but after returning to Rao Castle and learning that Lin had been besieged by 20 auras, Irina's favorability towards those auras dropped to the freezing point. She fought bloody battles in the front, but the person she cherished most was backstabbed by those stupid auras in the back. How could she not be angry? Exclamation mark. After learning that the Ministry of Magic took all the credit on itself and brushed off Lin's efforts, Irina's anger was already overflowing. The facts were not much different from what Lin had guessed. Not long after the Ministry of Magic issued the notice, Old Barty sent a letter to Lin. In the letter, Old Barty explained that this notice was entirely Cornelius Fudge's idea. He wanted to fight for the rights and interests that Lin and Irina should have, but was rejected by the greedy Minister Fudge. After reading Old Barty's letter, Lin just wrote back to comfort him and said that it was not his fault. Irina was angry because Lin En was backstabbed, but Lin En himself did not feel much about these things. After all, the magic world is based on strength. Instead of wasting time entangled with those good-for-nothings in the Ministry of Magic, it is better to break through to the realm of the Demon King level wizard as soon as possible, so that he can have a fighting force in the future when fighting Voldemort. Among the things that happened in these days, there are only two things that can make Lin En happy. One is that he successfully cast the soul attaching spell on little Barty and obtained the other party's vision. The other is that his communication with old Barty gradually became closer and even reached the level of cooperation. After discussing with Irina, Lin En decided to reach a certain cooperation with old Barty with the power of the Royal family. If possible, he and Irina hope to support old Barty as the Minister of Magic in the future. With the incident of little Barty, Lin En and Irina also have a handle on old Barty. Unless old Barty wants to die with them, the other party is likely to be unwilling to tear their faces. You know, even if they didn't have this handle on Barty Jr., with Lin able to fight 20 auras and Irina able to kill dozens of Death Eaters, Barty Sr. would not dare to do it because he was afraid of their strength. After all, if Barty Sr. forced Lin and Irina to rebel, then the responsibility of adding 2 more Dark Lords to the British magic world would definitely not be something Barty Sr. could afford. In this case, Lin and Irina could temporarily maintain their trust in Barty Sr. Perhaps the Ministry of Magic with Barty Sr. as the Minister of Magic could not help them much in the future, but as long as the Ministry of Magic could not hold them back, they would be satisfied. Everyone in the original book saw the Ministry of Magic's appeasement policy towards Voldemort, and Lin and Irina felt a little headache just imagining that those rubbish in the Ministry of Magic not only did not resist Voldemort, but also tried to stop them from dealing with Voldemort. Therefore, having a controllable Ministry of Magic was also a key factor in their plan to deal with Voldemort. Soon, the first day of school at Hogwarts School of Witchcraft and Wizardry arrived. With the help of the house elf Gale, Lin and Irina apparated to a corner of King's Cross Station. Carrying the same small school bag, they walked towards the pillar leading to platform 9. The weather was not very good that day. The heavy rain pattered against the windows of the Hogwarts Express. When Lin and Irina were preparing to leave, they each added a cashmere coat of the same style. Not long after Lin and Irina found the box, Harry's trio also came in. They sat down opposite Lin and Irina. While waiting for the Hogwarts Express to start, the 5 people in the box were all chatting. Senior Ron and Irina, do you know that the retired aura from the Ministry of Magic last night, who seemed to be called Mad Eye Moody, thought someone attacked his backyard and ended up blowing up his trash can. At this time, Ron gossiped to Lin and Irina. Hearing this, Lin and Irina smiled at each other, and they did not answer Ron's words. How could they not know about this? Exclamation mark. Irina was about to go to bed last night, but Lin sneaked into her room in the middle of the night and used magic projection to project the vision of Barty the Younger that he had obtained through the soul charm. So Lin and Irina sat together and watched a live broadcast of Barty the Younger and Peter Pettigrew teaming up to attack Mad Eye Moody. If you're listening to this novel on a channel other than Fanfic World, it means they downloaded and uploaded it without effort. We cordially invite you to visit our channel, Mundo Fanfic Novelos. There you'll find the original version of this story and you can explore many other novels of various genres. We're waiting for you to immerse yourself in a world of incredible novels. Chapter 284. I told you not to be love-minded when making friends. Even the process of Barty Jr. taking the Polyjuice potion to transform into Mad Eye Moody and stuffing the real Moody into the box was witnessed by Lin and Irina. Therefore, Lin and Irina, who had witnessed these things, naturally would not be interested in the news that Ron said had been passed around for several times. Seeing that Lin and Irina were both uninterested, Ron curled his lips and stopped talking. Soon, the Hogwarts Express slowly started moving. As the Hogwarts Express was moving, Harry and others found that the Malfoy trio was sitting in the next compartment. However, compared with his usual arrogant and domineering appearance, Malfoy today was sighing and looked very depressed. Not only that, Harry also noticed the resentment in the eyes of Malfoy, Crabbe and Goyle. After eavesdropping on the conversation in the next compartment for a while, Harry learned that Malfoy's fathers were arrested for participating in the Death Eaters parade on the night of the Quidditch World Cup. They should be thankful that Irina showed mercy, which made their father one of the 6 Death Eaters who survived. Otherwise, they would all have become orphans. Ron said bluntly, after learning what happened to the Malfoy trio. Listening to the conversation between Harry and the others, Irina remembered the 2 fat Death Eaters who kept shrinking back like turtles in the battle that night. If she guessed correctly, those 2 Death Eaters were probably Old Goyle and Old Crab. As for Lucius Malfoy, Irina remembered the 2 Death Eaters who showed a solemn look to her when she was still an underage witch at the beginning of the battle. One of the 2 Death Eaters was Barty Crouch Jr., so the Death Eater who stood at the end of the team silently from beginning to end should be Lucius Malfoy. After all, only Lucius Malfoy, who had met them and learned that they had killed the 1,000-year-old basilisk, would be so cautious about her, a seemingly harmless underage wizard. When the sky had become pitch black, the Hogwarts Express arrived at the station amid rumbling thunder and pouring rain. Looking at the bad weather outside, Irina waved her wand, and a nice blue light bloomed, freezing the rain falling from the sky into ice, and these solid ices turned into an ice umbrella that could accommodate 2 people under Irina's control. Irina waved to Lin, and the 2 of them held an ice umbrella and walked towards the carriage pulled by the Thestrals. At this time, at the entrance of the Hogwarts Express, Harry and the other 2 looked at Lin and Irina, who were cuddling together and walking away with complicated expressions. Irina has forgotten her friends because she has a partner, Harry said with tears in his eyes. Hermione also held her forehead with her hand. No, Irina had not only forgotten her friends, but also her best friend. It was said that you should not fall in love when making friends. Look, retribution is coming. Careless in making friends. Woo woo woo. Harry, Ron and Hermione suppressed their grievances while using transfiguration to transform themselves into an umbrella and rushed to the carriage pulled by the Thestrals in the heavy rain. When they arrived at the castle gate, Harry and Ron got off the carriage in 2 steps and 3 steps, wanting to run into the castle to keep warm. However, just as the 2 came to the hallway, a big red balloon filled with water fell from the ceiling and soaked Ron. Before Ron could react, the second big water balloon fell again and exploded at Harry's feet. The cold water splashed out and wet Harry and Hermione's shoes. Lin and Irina, who were not far away, subconsciously took a step back to avoid having their shoes soiled by the splashing water. Looking at the water stains on the ground less than a foot away from their shoes, Lin and Irina looked up. About 20 feet above their heads, floating was Peeves, the mischievous ghost. Peeves looked short, wearing a hat with bells and an orange bow tie. He aimed at the target again, and the muscles on his mischievous face were tense. Peeves. An angry voice came over. Peeves, get down right now. Professor McGonagall rushed out of the hall, but the ground was too wet and she slipped. Fortunately, she grabbed Hermione's neck and didn't fall. Ouch. I'm sorry, Miss Granger. Professor McGonagall was also startled, and she quickly apologized to Hermione, who was accidentally injured by her. Hermione rubbed her throat and panted, "It's okay, Professor." Seeing this, Professor McGonagall became even more resentful of Peeves. She adjusted her pointed hat and glared at Peeves through her square glasses. Professor McGonagall shouted angrily, "Peeves, get down now. I didn't do anything." However, Peeves didn't bite. He just chuckled and raised a big water ball above his head again. This time, his target was Irina below. Seeing Peeves' action, Irina narrowed her eyes and gently pointed her wand at the big water ball in Peeves' hand. The big water ball suddenly became hard and heavy. The water in the big water ball condensed into ice in an instant. The sudden weight made Peeves unable to keep his balance for a while, and he was actually thrown down by the big water ball that had frozen into ice, and he fell on his face in such a bad posture. "Give me face, Peeves." After seeing Peeves was going to play a prank on Irina, Lin En's face darkened. He waved his wand, and a golden light flew out at a speed that was difficult to see with the naked eye, turning into a golden chain to tie up Peeves. This golden rope was naturally Lin En's golden rope, and it was engraved with an alchemical array with the power of forbidden magic. Under the suppression of the power of forbidden magic, Peeves couldn't even make himself nihilistic to escape the rope that bound the entity. "Great silent freezing spell, Miss Lowell," Professor McGonagall said to Irina with a smile. In fact, what Professor McGonagall said was not accurate. What Irina just released was not a silent freezing spell, but the power of ice transformed by the ice phantom god, which controlled the ice in the air to freeze the big water ball. But Irina didn't care about that. She smiled at Professor McGonagall and said softly, "Thank you for the compliment." Professor McGonagall nodded slightly. She waved her wand and used the zombie flying charm to lift Peeves up. Then she told everyone to go to the auditorium, saying that there was something important to be announced after the dinner. As for what the important matter was, Harry and the others might be confused, but Lin and Irina knew it very well. Triwizard Tournament. Please give me tips and monthly tickets. Chapter 285, a chance to face Voldemort. Everyone soon arrived at the auditorium. This year's auditorium was still as magnificent as before. Hundreds of candles were suspended above the tables, illuminating the golden plates and goblets. The 4 long tables of the colleges were filled with young wizards from the 4 colleges, and the professors of Hogwarts School of Witchcraft and Wizardry were sitting in the teacher seats above. However, there were 2 empty seats in the teacher seats at this time, which belonged to the Professor of Care of Magical Creatures and the Professor of Defense Against the Dark Arts. After the end of the last school year, Newt resumed his usual retirement life, and Hagrid resumed his position as the Professor of Care of Magical Creatures after the suspension inspection. Not long after, Hagrid brought many first-year wizards to the hall, and he returned to his seat and sat down. After the arrival of the first-year students, this year's sorting ceremony began. After the sorting hat sang the sorting song that it had spent a year conceiving, Professor McGonagall presided over the sorting ceremony and sorted the freshmen into the colleges that suited them one by one. After the sorting ceremony, Dumbledore announced the start of the opening dinner. Countless delicious foods appeared on the table, and everyone was feasting on them. Irina stuffed her mouth with delicious food, like a little hamster. She glanced at Hermione, who was also enjoying the food beside her, and secretly breathed a sigh of relief. Fortunately, she and Lin intercepted the Death Eater parade 4 days ago, and informed old Barty of the identity of little Barty in advance, so that the scene in the original book, where the house elf Winky was scolded and expelled by old Barty, did not appear in front of Hermione. Therefore, she did not witness the unfair treatment of house elves like in the original book, and she was no longer as sensitive to the house elves as in the original book. She even believed that the house elves raised in Hogwarts Castle were slave labor, and was unwilling to eat the so-called slave labor at the opening party. This also saved Irina from being annoyed by her best friend and unable to eat the food at the opening dinner. On the other side, at the Slytherin table, Irving Farley, who was sitting next to Lin, asked sideways, "Lin, I heard that 4 days ago you and Irina teamed up with the Ministry of Magic to kill dozens of Death Eaters?" Lin didn't intend to hide the members of his small group. He glanced at the little wizards around him and gently waved his wand. "Close your ears and shut your ears." After casting the ear blocking spell to create a safe communication environment, Lin said without hesitation, "To be precise, Irina and I teamed up to kill dozens of Death Eaters. As for the auras from the Ministry of Magic, they all arrived afterwards. Even if they had arrived later, they wouldn't have seen the 6 living Death Eaters." Wow. Irving's eyes showed a yearning look. "You are worthy of it. It's a pity that my magic level is not enough, and I can't help you." Hearing this, Lin chuckled and asked, "What level of magic have you reached now?" Irving pondered for a while and said, "Many of my spells can be cast silently, and the spell I'm best at, the weather spell, can barely be cast without a wand. However, compared with the magic you are good at, the weather spell seems a little ordinary." Irving's best spell is the weather spell, but unlike the control of various climates, he is better at controlling thunderstorms with the weather spell. He can even use the weather spell to summon thunder on a sunny day. Lin smiled and patted Irving on the shoulder and said, "It's a good thing to be good at spells. Just like I'm good at fire magic, Irina is good at ice magic, and the so-called savior Harry Potter is also good at the disarming spell. There is no distinction between strong and weak magic. Even the cleansing spell can treat the enemy as garbage after practicing to the extreme, let alone the weather spell that can control the weather." Lin was not comforting Irving. What he said was indeed the truth. After all, the ancient magic books of the Fly family recorded an ancient magic that required the completion of the silent and wandless casting of the weather spell as a learning threshold. If Lin En remembered correctly, the ancient magic was called Thunderfall. Irving also thought of this. He nodded vigorously and said, I understand, Lin En. I will try my best to reach the threshold of practicing that ancient magic before the start of this year's OWL exam. Lin En nodded slightly. He looked at Irving's firm eyes beside him, and an idea came to his mind. If you are given a chance, would you be willing to? Lin En pondered, still hesitant in his heart. What chance? Irving asked. Lin En said in a low voice, an opportunity to face the resurrected Voldemort. Hearing Lin En's words, Irving's face was stern. He looked at Lin En's deep eyes. He could be sure that Lin En was not joking with him. However, facing the resurrected Voldemort, the nightmare of countless British wizards, Irving's body trembled slightly, but his eyes were more determined than ever before. If there is such an opportunity, then I think I'm willing. Seeing this, Lin smiled, patted Irving's shoulder vigorously, and said lightly, in this case, then I require you to master the ancient magic called Thunder before the OWL exam begins. I think you need to have enough power to protect yourself. I don't want to see my partner die under Voldemort's killing curse after just one encounter. Irving nodded and said, I will do my best. While Lin and Irving were talking, the start of term dinner was about to end. As the desserts were swept away by the little wizards, the last remaining crumbs on the plate disappeared, and the plate became clean and shiny again. At this time, Dumbledore, who was sitting in the teacher's seat, stood up. The noise in the hall stopped immediately. The only sounds in the quiet hall were the howling of the wind and the pounding of the rain. Okay. Dumbledore looked at everyone with a smile and said, now that we are all full and satisfied, I must ask for your attention again. I have a few announcements to make. Mr. Filch, the castle keeper, wants me to tell you that this year, there are a few more items that are prohibited from use in the castle. They are screaming yo-yos, spiked flying saucers, and combo boomerangs. The entire list includes 437 items. You can see it in Mr. Filch's office. Anyone who is interested can check it out. After saying this, Dumbledore's mouth twitched a few times. Then, Dumbledore continued, as before, I want to remind everyone that students are not allowed to enter the Forbidden Forest over there, and students below the 3rd grade are not allowed to visit Hogsmeade Village. In addition, I'm very sorry to tell you that there will be no House Cup Quidditch match this year. Chapter 286 Cedric. Yes. As Dumbledore announced that the House Cup Quidditch tournament would not be held this year, the entire hall erupted in a commotion. In particular, the teammates of the Quidditch teams of various colleges expressed their dissatisfaction loudly, with the We Are Light Twins being the loudest. However, Dumbledore ignored the protests of the young wizards and continued to speak on his own. This is because a large-scale event will start in October and last throughout the school year, occupying a lot of teachers' time and energy. But I believe that you can all get a lot of fun from it. I'm very happy to announce to everyone that this year at Hogwarts. Before Dumbledore finished speaking, a deafening thunder suddenly sounded on the enchanted ceiling of the hall, and the door of the hall was knocked open with a bang. A man was standing at the door of the hall. He was leaning on a long cane and wrapped in a black traveling cloak. The professors and young wizards in the hall turned to look at the uninvited guest. Suddenly, a forked bolt of lightning flashed across the hall's enchanted ceiling, illuminating the uninvited guest. The uninvited guest took off his hood, shook out his long grey hair, and began to walk towards the staff table. Thumps, thumps, thumps. With every step he took, a hollow sound echoed in the hall. He walked straight to the end of the hall, then turned right and limped towards Dumbledore. At this moment, another bolt of lightning flashed across the ceiling. This one illuminated the uninvited guest's face in an extremely clear way. The young wizards present had never seen such a face before. It looked like it was carved out of a piece of rotten wood, and the carver seemed to have only a vague idea of what a human face should look like, and he was not very good at using the carving knife. Every inch of skin on that scary face seemed to be scarred. His mouth was like a crooked gash, and the nose was missing where it should be. The most terrifying thing about this uninvited guest was his eyes. One of his eyes was small, black, and shiny. The other was large, round like a coin, and a bright blue. The blue eye kept moving without blinking, turning up and down, left and right, completely unrelated to the normal eye. the blue eyeball even rolled over and drilled into the other person's head, leaving people with only a big white eyeball. There was no doubt that this blue eyeball was not a real eye, but an alchemical creation. At the Slytherin and Gryffindor tables, Lin and Irina looked thoughtfully at the thunder that flashed from time to time on the ceiling. It seemed that the rumor that the enchanted ceiling would use thunder as a warning if someone with malicious intentions towards Hogwarts School of Witchcraft and Wizardry entered the hall was not nonsense. Otherwise, after Professor Moody, disguised by Barty Crouch Jr. with Polyjuice Potion, came to the hall, the ceiling would not have undergone such a huge change in just a few seconds. At this time, Professor Moody walked to Dumbledore's side and stretched out a hand, which was also scarred like his face. Dumbledore shook hands with him, and after talking to him for a few words, he asked him to sit down in the seat of the Defense Against the Dark Arts professor. Please allow me to introduce a new Defense Against the Dark Arts professor. Dumbledore broke the silence happily. Professor Moody. Generally speaking, when a new professor meets the young wizards, everyone will applaud to welcome him. However, now, except for Dumbledore and Hagrid, no professor or student applauded. Dumbledore and Hagrid clapped a few times, and they found that their applause echoed alone in the silent hall, which seemed very abrupt, so they put down their hands tactfully. The other young wizards seemed to be stunned by Professor Moody's strange appearance. They just stared at him intently. Professor Moody seemed indifferent to the cold reaction of the crowd. He ignored the large can of pumpkin juice in front of him, but reached into his travel cloak, took out a curved wine bottle, and took a big sip. At the Slytherin table and the Gryffindor table, Lin and Irina narrowed their eyes slightly. They had just watched a live broadcast last night, and naturally understood that the wine flask in Professor Moody's hand was not filled with wine at all, but Polyjuice Potion. At this time, Dumbledore cleared his throat and continued his speech. As I said just now, in the next few months, we will be honored to host a very exciting event that has not been held for more than a century. I'm very happy to tell you that the Triwizard Tournament will be held at Hogwarts Castle this year. As Dumbledore's voice fell, many young wizards who knew about the Triwizard Tournament below all made incredible exclamations, especially the Weirlight twins, whose eyes were wide open. However, since most of the young wizards did not know what the Triwizard Tournament was, Dumbledore began to introduce the Triwizard Tournament to everyone. The Triwizard Tournament was founded about 700 years ago. It is a friendly competition between the three largest magic schools in Europe. The three schools are Hogwarts School of Witchcraft and Wizardry, Bogsburton School of Witchcraft and Wizardry, and Durmstrang School of Witchcraft and Wizardry. Each school selects a champion, and then the three champions compete in 3 magic projects. The Triwizard Tournament is held every 5 years, and the 3 schools take turns to host it. Everyone agrees that this is a great way for young wizards from different countries to build friendships. But later, the death toll was too high, and the Triwizard Tournament was interrupted. After learning that the reason for the interruption of the Triwizard Tournament was too many deaths, many young wizards, including Hermione, showed fear in their eyes. Over the centuries, wizards have tried several times to restore the Triwizard Tournament, Dumbledore continued, but none of them succeeded. However, the International Magical Cooperation Department and the Department of Magical Sports and Games of our Ministry of Magic believe that the time is ripe for another attempt. This summer we have done a lot of work to ensure that every champion will not be in danger of life. Hearing this, Lin and Irina subconsciously curled their lips. Their eyes were on Cedric Diggory, who was chatting and laughing with many badgers of the same grade at the Hufflepuff table. Dumbledore, we have done a lot of work to ensure that every warrior will not be in danger of life. Cedric, yes. Chapter 287, Rhythm Masters Weirlight Twins. In October, the headmasters of Bogsburton School of Witchcraft and Wizardry and Durmstrang School of Witchcraft and Wizardry will lead their carefully selected competitors to come. The ceremony of selecting the champions will be held on Halloween. An impartial referee will decide which students are most qualified to compete for the Triwizard Cup and win honor for their schools. The winner will also receive a prize of 1,000 galleons. After learning that the winner would receive a prize of 1,000 galleons, Fred couldn't help but lower his voice and said, I want to participate. If he could get this prize of 1,000 galleons, then he and George would have the funds To start, realize Wizard Wheeze is in the future. Thinking of this, his face was full of excitement. It seems that Fred is not the only one who fantasizes about becoming a champion of Hogwarts School of Witchcraft and Wizardry. At the long tables of each college, many little wizards can be seen either staring at Dumbledore enthusiastically or whispering excitedly with their neighbors. But just when everyone was excited, Dumbledore spoke again, and the hall became quiet again. Dumbledore said calmly, "I know you all want to win the True Wizard Tournament trophy for Hogwarts School of Witchcraft and Wizardry, but the participating schools and the Ministry of Magic have agreed to set an age limit for this year's competitors. Only students who are 17 years old, that is, 17 years old or older, are allowed to register for consideration, we think." Before Dumbledore finished speaking, many young wizards below protested angrily, especially the Weirlight twins whose dreams were shattered, who became furious. Fred and George turned into rhythm masters on the spot and set the rhythm between the 4 major colleges. Dumbledore, this measure is very necessary. Fred, no way. Dumbledore, because the True Wizard Tournament is still very difficult and dangerous. George, this is unfair. Dumbledore, no matter how many precautions we take, students below the 6th and 7th grades are simply impossible to deal with, so the Ministry of Magic has issued this final decision. Fred and George said in unison, "Bullshit decision. What the hell?" That's right. Many young wizards who thought they could become so-called warriors were all excited. Dumbledore glanced at the young wizards below with a majestic look. The young wizards who were watched by Dumbledore restrained their voices one after another, and even Fred and George, who were always bold and daring, shrank their heads. Dumbledore raised his voice slightly and said loudly, "Unless you are strong enough to break the magic I set, I guarantee that no student who is not old enough can deceive the fair referee and become a warrior of Hogwarts School of Witchcraft and Wizardry." Hearing Dumbledore's words, Lin couldn't help but raise his head in surprise. You know, in the original book, Dumbledore never said, "Unless you are strong enough to break the magic I set." Is Dumbledore hinting at something? Exclamation mark. In the eyes of most young wizards, Dumbledore's words are undoubtedly nonsense. They don't believe that anyone can break the magic set by Dumbledore, a demon-level wizard. However, if you really have to name a candidate who may break this magic, then Lin En and Irina, who once teamed up to kill the basilisk that survived for 1,000 years, must be on the list. In addition, the carrier of this so-called magic is the Goblet of Fire, and the Goblet of Fire itself is an out-and-out all-chemical creation. In this way, if Lin En makes a bold guess, then can he think that the magic in Dumbledore's mouth is not actually magic, but alchemy? Exclamation mark. Dumbledore had collaborated with Nicholas Flamel on alchemy, which showed that Dumbledore's attainments in alchemy were not much lower than Nicholas Flamel's. Could it be that Dumbledore's words just now were hinting at something? Exclamation mark. Lin En frowned tightly, thinking about the possible hidden meaning in Dumbledore's words, and looked at Irina, who was sitting at the Gryffindor table. Sure enough, Irina also frowned and looked at him at this time. Obviously, she also found the possible hidden hint in Dumbledore's words. The delegations from Bogsbuttons and Durmstrang will arrive in October and spend the better part of the school year with us. I know that you will all be cordial and friendly to our foreign guests during their stay here, and that you will support the champion of Hogwarts School of Witchcraft and Wizardry wholeheartedly once he or she is chosen. Well, it is getting late, and it is important that you go into class tomorrow morning refreshed and clear-headed. Go to bed. Quick. At this point, Dumbledore finished his last words, sat down, and turned to talk to Professor Moody. The hall was noisy again, with all kinds of voices rang out, and students stood up, and rushed to a double door, and walked out of the hall. However, unlike the little wizards who were heading to their dormitories, Lin and Irina did not intend to go to bed. They were both worried and walked towards the room of requirement on the 8th floor. After arriving at the room of requirement, Lin En walked back and forth in front of the tapestry 3 times, and summoned a room with a meeting room inside. I think you should have seen the meaning of Professor Dumbledore's words, right? Irina looked at Lin En and asked. Lin En nodded slightly and said, yes, if I'm not mistaken, the magic that Professor Dumbledore cast on the Goblet of Fire is probably not magic, but alchemy. But I don't understand what he means. Is he warning me not to touch the Goblet of Fire without permission, or is he hinting that I can use alchemy to modify the operating logic of the Goblet of Fire to register myself, and that the so-called magic is a test for me. The information revealed in Dumbledore's words was too little, so little that it was difficult for Lin En and Irina to analyze the other party's true intentions. Just as Lin and Irina were thinking hard, an idea suddenly occurred to Irina, and she suddenly said, "Perhaps we can go directly to Professor Dumbledore and ask him in person." Professor Dumbledore spoke so vaguely tonight. Perhaps it was just because Barty Crouch Jr. and other students were here, and it was inconvenient to say it. Then if we ask him privately, maybe he will tell us directly? Hearing this, Lin's eyes lit up. He walked forward, hugged Irina tightly, and said, "Yes, I'm really confused, because I'm involved. Professor Dumbledore is not only our teacher, but also my elder's former comrade in arms. We can just go directly and ask him what he thinks instead of trying to guess about him secretly." Being held in Lin's arms, Irina couldn't help but lower her head. While she was happy that she could help each other, a strange feeling surged in her heart. Chapter 288, that means sending Voldemort to hell. She did not make any resistance, but let the excited Lin En hold her. It was not until Lin En's mood gradually calmed down and realized that his actions were a little too intimate that he let go of his hand, scratched his head, looked at Irina with a slightly red face, and asked, "Then let's go find Professor Dumbledore now?" Irina shook her head and said, "When we left just now, Professor Dumbledore seemed to be still talking to Professor Moody disguised as Barty the youngster. Let's wait until after curfew." Lin En had no objection. He waved his wand and made tea for the two of them. They held the teacups in their hands and sipped the tea in the cups. The overly intimate actions just now made them both a little embarrassed, and they dared not look into each other's eyes. It was not until the curfew time that Lin En and Irina breathed a sigh of relief at the same time and stood up. Lin En pushed open the door of the room of requirement and came to the corridor with Irina. The two went in the direction of the principal's office not far away. Before leaving the room of requirement, Lin used his own imitation Marauder's map to check Professor Moody's current location and confirmed that Dumbledore was alone in the principal's office at this time, so the two did not have many concerns on the way to the principal's office. Arriving at the stone statue outside the principal's office, Lin took out the Marauder's map again. After confirming that no one would come here for a while, he waved his wand to remove the disillusionment charm on his body. Lin pulled out a long list from his pocket and handed it to Irina, who had also removed the disillusionment charm beside him, while he was responsible for staring at the Marauder's map in his hand. Bibby multi-flavored beans, Zizibi candy, lemon sherbet, blowing super bubble gum, licorice wand. Irina's crisp voice sounded, and when she read cockroach pile, the stone statue blocking the way to the principal's office finally moved. The stone statue moved to the side of the road, revealing the road behind to the principal's office. Lin and Irina walked forward and followed the spiral staircase to the door of the principal's office. Lin stepped forward and knocked gently on the door of the principal's office. Soon, the door of the principal's office opened automatically, and Lin and Irina saw Dumbledore sitting behind the desk. In front of Dumbledore was a cup of honey water. He looked at the two with interest. From the two empty cups on the other side of the desk, it can be seen that Dumbledore had expected Lin and Irina to come tonight. "Please sit down, Lin and Irina. Black tea or coffee?" Dumbledore said softly. Lin and Irina, who had just drunk black tea, said in unison, "Coffee, thank you." Hearing this, Dumbledore waved his wand, and hot coffee with white mist appeared in the cups in front of the two. Lin En did not touch the cup in front of him, but asked directly, "Professor Dumbledore, what you said in the hall, unless you are strong enough to break the magic I set, must be a hint to us, right? Otherwise, with your magic power as a demon king, there is no need to emphasize this point." Dumbledore smiled. He did not directly answer Lin En's question, but turned to ask, "Lin, what do you think of our new defense against the dark arts professor, Professor Moody?" Hearing Professor Dumbledore asking about Professor Moody, Lin En suddenly realized that it seemed that Professor Dumbledore had discovered the abnormality of Professor Moody. Yes, with Dumbledore's level, how could he not smell the smell of polyjuice potion? Exclamation mark. In this way, the fact that Harry was taken to Little Hangleton Village by the key to resurrect Voldemort in the original book was within Dumbledore's expectations. using Harry's blood to resurrect Voldemort and make Voldemort unable to kill Harry with the ancient blood magic was Dumbledore's plan. The only unexpected thing in this plan that Dumbledore didn't expect was Cedric's death. Perhaps even Dumbledore himself couldn't have imagined that with Barty Crouch Jr. cheating throughout the whole process and even controlling Crumb with the Imperious Curse to assist him, Harry was not able to get the Goblet of Fire alone, but was taken away with Cedric by the portkey. Facing Dumbledore's question, Lin said without hesitation, "Disguise. The Professor Moody standing in front of us now is just the Death Eater Barty Crouch Jr. disguised with Polyjuice Potion. The real Professor Moody was attacked by Barty Crouch Jr. the day before the school started, and now he should be hidden in the box he brought." After getting Lin's answer, Dumbledore's eyes were obviously a little surprised. With the intelligence of Lin and Irina, Dumbledore could guess that they would find out something was wrong with Professor Moody, but Dumbledore did not expect that Lin was so clear about the true identity of Professor Moody, and the information he knew was even clearer than Dumbledore. You know, even Dumbledore himself, after Mad-Eye Moody was attacked last night, he investigated overnight and only found out that the other party was disguised by Death Eaters. But Lin was able to accurately tell the identity of Barty Crouch Jr. in the hiding place of the real Alastair Moody. "Can you tell me how you know this?" Dumbledore asked gently, but his eyes looked much more solemn, and he no longer had the tone of teaching students before, but was just like a formal conversation with his comrades. The information that Lin just revealed made Dumbledore willing to put Lin and Irina on the same level as himself and discuss the next things as comrades. Dumbledore rubbed his eyes gently. For some reason, he felt that the boy sitting in front of him was no longer the little wizard Lin Rowe, but his comrade in arms Henry Rao, who was an undercover Death Eater. Lin had no intention of hiding it from Dumbledore. He waved his wand and a projection screen appeared in front of the three of them. What was shown on this projection screen was exactly the perspective of Barty Crouch Jr. "I got inspiration from an ancient magic and invented a spell called the Soul Curse, which can obtain the enemy's vision. 4 days ago, Irina and I found Barty Crouch Jr. in the process of fighting the rioting Death Eaters. In order to get more information about Voldemort and the Death Eaters, I cast the Soul Curse on Barty Crouch Jr. Therefore, last night, Irina and I witnessed the whole process of Barty Crouch Jr. and Peter Pettigrew attacking Mr. Alastair Moody. This is why I can know all this in such detail," Lin said calmly, and he confessed everything about the Soul Curse to Dumbledore. This is a test for him. If Dumbledore is willing to accept everything he has shown and expresses his intention to cooperate, then he and Irina will not mind revealing more information to Dumbledore so that both sides can cooperate and win. After all, at this stage, their goal is the same, that is to send Voldemort to hell. Please reward and monthly ticket. Chapter 289 I will always fight alongside you. Looking at the screen projected by Lin with magic, Dumbledore remained silent for a long time. His expression seemed calm, but his heart was already in turmoil. Lin, if possible, I would like to ask you about this spell." After a while, Dumbledore let out a long breath and said to Lin sincerely, "If they could master this spell that could obtain the enemy's vision when fighting Voldemort, then they would not need to exchange human lives for intelligence, and would not cause the death of their own personnel due to the lack of intelligence." What countless Phoenix Order comrades had been seeking hard was now invented by Lin. How could Dumbledore not feel mixed emotions? Exclamation mark. Hearing this, the corners of Lin En's mouth rose slightly, and he said with a smile, "Of course, Professor Dumbledore. But before that, I think we should first discuss the purpose of Barty Crouch Jr. lurking in Hogwarts Castle." Yes, Dumbledore nodded. "If my guess is correct, I think his target should be Harry, or Voldemort's target is Harry." Dumbledore no longer concealed his opinions from Lin En and Irina. He frankly expressed his views on Barty Crouch Jr. lurking in Hogwarts Castle. At this time, Irina whispered, "Voldemort wants to use Harry's blood to resurrect, right, Professor Dumbledore?" Dumbledore nodded slightly and said, "I think so, but there are many resurrection rituals that use blood as a medium. Even if I have some guesses, if I blindly believe in my guesses without any factual basis, it may lead to results that we don't want to see." Lin stared at Dumbledore's blue eyes behind his half-moon glasses, and his voice like a dream slowly sounded, "Father's bones. Donated unintentionally, can make your son reborn. Servant's flesh, donated voluntarily, can make your master reborn. Enemy's blood, forced to donate, can resurrect your enemy. Professor Dumbledore, I think you should be clear about this resurrection ceremony? Lin asked lightly. Hearing this, Dumbledore suddenly understood. He said to himself, is this the resurrection ceremony? In this case, it makes sense that Voldemort needs Harry's blood. Dumbledore did not ask Lin how he knew about this ceremony. After all, Lin and Irina had brought him too many surprises today, so many that he could no longer regard them as ordinary little wizards. The remains of Voldemort's muggle father are in Little Hangleton Village. It can be guessed that the resurrection ceremony is held there. In other words, Barty Crouch Jr.'s purpose is most likely to bring Harry to Little Hangleton Village to help Voldemort resurrect. Lin continued. Dumbledore nodded, and he suddenly asked, Lin, from what you said, you don't seem surprised by this? Lin smiled. He looked at Dumbledore steadily and asked, Professor Dumbledore, you allowed Barty Jr. to disguise himself as Professor Moody to enter Hogwarts Castle to teach. Wasn't it for him to take Harry away and help Voldemort resurrect? Then, Dumbledore said, why should I do this? Before Lin could speak, Irina beside him spoke softly. We all heard your conversation with Harry that day. Since you said that Harry's mother cast an ancient blood magic called love for Harry before she died, then if Voldemort was resurrected with Harry's blood, he would never be able to kill Harry before Harry came of age. Train a savior, use the so-called savior to curb Voldemort's power, and have the savior defeat Voldemort in the future. This is your plan, right, Professor Dumbledore? Instead of letting Voldemort revive with a Horcrux, it would be better to let his body revive under restricted conditions. This would also make Voldemort more controllable, wouldn't it? Every word Irina said touched Dumbledore's heart. As Irina said, this was Dumbledore's plan. Looking at the little witch's beautiful ice blue eyes, Dumbledore sighed softly. Since you all know, why do you still ask me? Dumbledore asked. Lin En said, Professor Dumbledore, you are our elder and my father's former comrade in arms. We hope to cooperate with you. The magic world respects strength. Even if we can calculate everything, the gap in strength means that we cannot defeat Voldemort. Therefore, we need your help, Dumbledore, the greatest white wizard of this century, or the white devil Dumbledore. As Lin En said, in the face of strength, all conspiracies can be crushed at will. As long as they do not become Demon King level wizards, they will not be qualified to challenge Voldemort. Before that, they must have a Demon King level wizard of the same level. Dumbledore was silent again, staring at the two little wizards in front of him who were only in the 4th or 5th grade. Well, I think I'm convinced by you, Lin En and Irina. Dumbledore's eyes softened, and he said so. Lin asked, thank you, Professor Dumbledore. Now let's get back to the topic. Can you tell us what you meant by those words you hinted at in the auditorium tonight? Dumbledore sighed again and said slowly, originally, I noticed that you were different, so I planned to warn you not to participate in the Triwizard Tournament, so as not to be dragged into the vortex of this conspiracy. But now, I think I was wrong. Since you are asking me again, then I want to tell you, Lin, I will use alchemy to set a ban on an all-chemical artifact called the Goblet of Fire, prohibiting any underage wizard from putting his name into the Goblet of Fire. And you, Lin, if you can remove the restrictions I set with alchemy, then you can become a warrior of Hogwarts School of Witchcraft and Wizardry, and participate in this plan. Dumbledore looked at Lin quietly and said so. Hearing this, Lin En smiled again, and said briskly, I will, Professor Dumbledore, I will remove your restrictions, become a warrior of Hogwarts School of Witchcraft and Wizardry, and be taken to Little Hangleton Village with Harry. Don't worry, I will bring Harry back intact. Lin En's eyes revealed a touch of youthful spirit, which made Dumbledore couldn't help but admire it. What about me, Lin En? You know, I will always fight alongside you. At this time, Irina spoke, her beautiful ice blue eyes staring at Lin En's dark red eyes, and she asked softly. Chapter 290 Malfoy becomes a ferret. Looking at the girl beside him, Lin said, and you, Irina, my best friend, will immediately work with Professor Dumbledore to capture Barty Crouch Jr. after I'm brought to Little Hangleton Village by the portkey, and kill him, after taking away all his information and memories. Irina nodded vigorously. Even though she and Lin were not in the same place, they were definitely fighting side by side. Don't you think it's a bit too arrogant to discuss killing in front of me, even if that person is Barty Crouch Jr.? Looking at the two boys and girls with light in their eyes, Dumbledore smiled. Obviously, Dumbledore did not mean to blame them. Lin smiled and said to Dumbledore, "You are young but not frivolous, Professor Dumbledore. So, are you willing to help us?" Dumbledore smiled and nodded, and asked, "Of course, my comrades. Then can you tell me what you are going to do after this? How are you going to bring Harry back?" Hearing this, Lin chuckled and said, "Come back? Why should we come back? After arriving at Little Hangleton Village, I will use the two-way mirror to send the coordinates there to Irina, and after you capture and kill Barty Crouch Jr., you will apparate there to support me and Harry. Oh, by the way, if nothing goes wrong, Professor Dumbledore, in addition to Irina, you will need to bring someone else." "Who?" Dumbledore asked. Lin said, "Irving Farley." Dumbledore was a little surprised to hear this name, and Irina's eyes were shining, as if she was thinking about something. "Okay, I agree," Dumbledore said. He was surprisingly happy. Lin En smiled, and he extended his hand, and Irina beside him also extended her hand, and the two said in unison, "Happy cooperation." Dumbledore also smiled, and put his big hand on Lin En and Irina's hands, and whispered, "Happy cooperation." After reaching a cooperation with Dumbledore, Lin En and Irina seemed to have unloaded a heavy burden. A Demon King level wizard standing behind them. This heavy trump card made them feel at ease. Lin En and Irina both have classes tomorrow, so after leaving the principal's office, they quickly returned to their respective dormitories to rest. The next day, Lin En and Irina got up early, and they all had full classes this morning. Needless to say, Irina was in the same class with Harry and the others. The first big class in the morning was the herbology class with the 4th year Hufflepuffs, and the second class was the care of magical creatures class with the 4th year Slytherins. Lin En's first class in the morning was transfiguration, and the second class was ancient runes. In Irina's herbal medicine class, Professor Sprout showed the young wizards a plant called babotubers. In fact, they didn't look like plants, but more like black sticky slugs that pop straight out of the soil. Moreover, each of these babotubers was wriggling slightly, and there were many shiny bulges on their bodies, which seemed to be filled with liquid. These liquids were babotuber pus. Undiluted babotuber pus would cause unusual damage to the skin, and if it was made into a weapon and splashed on the enemy, it would probably cause unusual damage. Irina looked at the babotubers in front of her and thought of using it in actual combat. Irina secretly glanced at Professor Sprout who was teaching in front of her. She took advantage of the little wizards around her not paying attention and slipped one of the babotubers into her magic plant bag. After the herbology class, Irina and the others walked along the gently sloping lawn toward Hagrid's hut at the edge of the Forbidden Forest. Hagrid stood outside the hut, holding the collar of his huge hound, Fang, in one hand, and on the ground at his feet were several open wooden boxes. Fang was wooing and struggling with the collar, apparently wanting to take a closer look at the contents of the boxes. When the young wizards approached, a very strange clacking sound came into their ears, with occasional faint explosions. Seeing Irina and the others coming, Hagrid greeted them. "Good morning. We'd better wait for the Slytherin students. They definitely don't want to miss this." The blasting-tailed Scroot. As he spoke, Hagrid pointed to the box at his feet. "Disgusting." Lavender Brown screamed when she saw the creature in the box, and she launched herself and jumped back. The word disgusting just happened to summarize the impression of most young wizards on this blasting-tailed Scroot. They looked like deformed, shellless lobsters, grayish and slimy, and looked very scary, with many legs sticking out in all directions, and no head could be seen. There were about 100 Scroots in each box, each about 6 inches long. They crawled around on top of each other, bumping against the walls of the box in a daze. They also gave off a very strong smell of rotten fish and shrimp. From time to time, a Scroot's tail would shoot out some sparks, and then with a slight pop sound, the Scroot would move forward a few inches. Looking at the Scroots in the box, that looked like enlarged maggots, Irina frowned and looked at Hagrid with a hard word. "Hagrid, this is a new creature you told me about?" Even Irina, who loved magical animals, did not agree with this box of maggots. "Ah, Scroots. Whether it is cute magical animals or fierce and strong magical animals, they are all the types that Irina likes. But this box of blasting tailed scroots made her pinch her nose and frown throughout her favorite care of magical creatures class for the first time. After noticing Irina's abnormality, Hagrid seemed to realize that the magical animals he cultivated this time were not very popular. After Hagrid's care of magical creatures class ended, Irina felt a lot lighter, and she only chose one care of magical creatures class as an elective course, so she had no class this afternoon. So Irina spent the whole afternoon taking care of the magical animals in her suitcase and refreshing her eyes with cute magical animals such as the Moon Idiot. It was not until dinner time that she came out of her small world in the box and walked towards the direction of the auditorium. However, when she was about to reach the auditorium, she found that the little wizards around her were running towards the direction of the auditorium, and these little wizards were muttering something like "Go and see. I heard that Malfoy was turned into a ferret by Professor Moody." If you're listening to this novel on a channel other than Fanfic World, it means they downloaded and uploaded it without effort. We cordially invite you to visit our channel, Mundo Fanfic Novelos. There you'll find the original version of this story and you can explore many other novels of various genres. We're waiting for you to immerse yourself in a world of incredible novels. Chapter 291. We never use transfiguration to punish students. When Irina arrived at the auditorium, she saw Professor Moody using his wand to control a ferret to flip up and down in a place, surrounded by a crowd, while Harry and the other two stood behind Professor Moody. Irina saw Lin standing at the entrance of the auditorium with his arms folded, and he was also watching the farce in the crowd. What happened? Irina approached Lin and asked in a low voice. Lin shrugged, pointed at the ferret being played by Professor Moody, and said, "What else could happen?" Malfoy quarreled with Harry and the others, attacked Harry from behind, and then was caught by Professor Moody and turned into a ferret. Irina suddenly realized that poor Malfoy had become a tool for Barty to improve Harry's favorability. After learning what happened here, Irina did not go into the crowd to look for Harry and the others, but stood with Lin, side by side, watching everything that happened there. In the crowd, Professor Moody waved his wand and said in a rough voice, "I hate people who attack others from behind. This is the most dirty and despicable behavior. It is the behavior of a coward." At this time, the ferret that was thrown around flew higher and higher under the control of Professor Moody. He screamed in pain and was forced to jump into the air. His forelegs and tail were all swinging wildly in despair. Professor Moody. Just as Professor Moody was playing with the ferret, a surprised voice came over. Professor McGonagall came down the marble stairs quickly with a pile of books in her arms. Professor Moody threw the ferret higher and responded to Professor McGonagall calmly. "Hello, Professor McGonagall. What are you doing?" Professor McGonagall asked hesitantly, her eyes moving along the ferret jumping in the air. Professor Moody said lightly, "Teach a lesson." "Teach a lesson? What? Professor Moody, is that a student?" Professor McGonagall exclaimed, and the books in her arms fell to the ground. Professor Moody nodded and said, "That's right." "Oh my god." Professor McGonagall exclaimed again. She hurried down the stairs and pulled out her wand. A moment later, with a loud crack, the ferret turned back into Malfoy's shape. Malfoy curled up and lay on the stone floor. His platinum blonde hair soaked with sweat was scattered on his face, which was as red as a monkey's butt. After a while, he barely stood up, trembling. "Professor Moody, we never use transfiguration to punish students." Professor McGonagall said weakly. "Professor Dumbledore must have told you, right?" Hearing Professor McGonagall's words, Lin and Irina at the door of the auditorium smiled at each other. Irina still remembered that in the first transfiguration class she attended, after arriving at Hogwarts Castle, Professor McGonagall warned Harry and Ron that she would turn them into pocket watches and maps. She still remembered that it was in that transfiguration class that she became the first little witch to be put in detention among the first year students because she fed catnip to Professor McGonagall, who had turned into a tabby cat and deliberately took out cat strips and cat teasers. At this time, in the middle of the crowd, facing Professor McGonagall's questioning, Professor Moody scratched his chin nonchalantly and said, "He probably mentioned it, but I think it needs to be severely frightened." Professor McGonagall immediately interrupted, "We can put him in detention. Professor Moody. Or report to the dean of the college, where the person is located. I will do that. Professor Moody stared at Malfoy with disgust and said. Perhaps in the eyes of some little wizards, Professor Moody hated Malfoy because his father was a Death Eater and was arrested in the riots on the night of the Quidditch World Cup 5 days ago. But Lin and Irina knew that the reason why little Barty hated him was because Lucius Malfoy handed over a large number of gold galleons to the Ministry of Magic on the day Voldemort fell, washed away his identity as a Death Eater, and even lived a life of wealth and glory for more than 10 years. In the past 10 years, Lucius Malfoy has never looked for his master Voldemort. This is why Barty hates Malfoy. On the ground, Malfoy's light eyes were still filled with tears of pain and shame. He looked up at Professor Moody with resentment and muttered something. But because his biggest backer Lucius Malfoy was arrested and imprisoned 5 days ago, he no longer had the capital to challenge the other party. Although Malfoy was aggrieved and hateful in his heart, he did not dare to express it too obviously. After Professor Moody's actions were stopped by Professor McGonagall, Professor Moody limped towards Professor Snape's office with Malfoy. Seeing that the show was over, the little wizards in the hall left one after another. In the next 2 days, Hogwarts Castle was a rare calm, and Lin and Irina's first defense against the dark arts class was in the second class in the morning and the first class in the afternoon on Thursday respectively. After Professor Moody turned Malfoy into a ferret, except for the little wizards in Slytherin, the little wizards in other colleges all looked forward to Professor Moody's class. Especially in the past 2 days, the little wizards in the 6th and 7th grades who had already taken Professor Moody's defense against the dark arts class were mysterious about Professor Moody's defense against the dark arts class, and showed a satisfied look, which made the little wizards who had not taken the defense against the dark arts class this school year feel like countless ants crawling in their hearts. Time quickly came to the second class on Thursday morning. Lin came to the defense against the dark arts classroom and sat down, while Irving Farley sat next to him. I heard from those seniors who had taken the class that Professor Moody's class is very interesting, but I don't know if it's true. Irving said so. Lin chuckled and said, don't worry, I won't let you down. By the way, put this on. As Lin said, he handed a golden pocket watch to Irving. What is this? I wondered as he was told, and after putting on the golden pocket watch, he asked curiously. From the magical fluctuations emanating from the golden pocket watch, Irwin could determine that it was an alchemical creation. But as early as when he joined Lin En's gang, Lin En had given him a lot of alchemical equipment, and now Lin En gave him this golden pocket watch, which made him interested in the function of the pocket watch. Lin En shrugged his shoulders and said, it can prevent you from losing face in this class. After all, you are mine, and if you lose face, I will lose face with you. Chapter 292 I'm going to cast the Imperious Curse on you. Irving looked puzzled. He didn't understand why Lin En felt embarrassed in this defense against the dark arts class, but since the boss said so, he would just do it. Thinking of this, Irving didn't say much. He nodded and cast his eyes on Professor Moody on the podium. On his desk was a book called Dark Magic, Self-Defense Guide. However, after the class bell rang, Professor Moody said to the little wizards holding books under the podium in a gruff voice, put these things away. You don't need these textbooks in my class. Hearing Professor Moody's words, Irving put away the textbooks in a huff, while Lin En sat there without moving. Lin En had never taken out the textbook at all. In fact, he had never bought this textbook at all. At this time, Professor Moody took out the roster, shook his head, shook his long grey hair away from his twisted and scarred face, and then began to call the roll. Professor Moody's normal eye moved down the list, and the magic eye kept turning around, staring at each student who answered. When he called Lin's name, he was stunned for a moment, and the pupil of his normal eye shrank slightly, looking a little shocked. But he quickly restrained his emotions, and continued to call the names of the little wizards, as if nothing had happened. Well, Professor Moody said lightly after the last little wizard answered, I received a letter from Professor Lupin, introducing the situation of this course. It seems that you have mastered a lot of basic knowledge on how to deal with dark creatures. You have learned to deal with boggarts, red hats, hinklepunks, grindelows, cabba and werewolves, right? Since Quirrell and Lockhart, the two rubbish, basically didn't teach the little wizards anything, the little wizards in the 3rd, 4th and 5th grades last year learned almost the same knowledge from Professor Lupin, and they all needed to make up for the missing knowledge through Professor Lupin. Of course, Lin and his classmates naturally had to learn more things than Harry and his classmates, but these things were not too much. After getting everyone's affirmative response, Professor Moody said calmly, "However, you have not learned enough about how to deal with various spells. Therefore, I'm going to let you experience what wizards do. I have a year to teach you how to deal with those dark wizards. Magic has many forms, and the powers they contain are different. Now, according to the regulations of the Ministry of Magic, I should teach you various spells to break the spells. That's all. Logically speaking, you are not in the 6th grade and have not passed the OWL exam. I should not tell you what those illegal black magic looks like, because you are still young and can't deal with this stuff. But in my opinion, the sooner you understand the things you have to deal with, the better it will be for you. If you have never seen something, how can you protect yourself from it? If a dark wizard wants to cast a black spell on you, he will not tell you his intention. He will not cast spells for you frankly, fairly, and politely," Professor Moody said. Even though Professor Moody standing on the podium was pretended by little Barty, Lin En had to admit that what he said was indeed very reasonable. Even if the real Professor Moody stood here, he probably couldn't say it better than him. So, does anyone know which spells will be punished most severely by the law? After saying that, Professor Moody looked around at everyone and asked. Faced with Professor Moody's question, most of the young wizards did not dare to raise their hands to answer. Even Irving next to Lin En was hesitant, not knowing whether he should say this answer. After all, the 3 unforgivable curses are something that young wizards of this age should never know. Who knows if the other party is stinging the law? Exclamation mark. When no one in the audience dared to answer, Lin En raised his hand calmly. After getting a signal from Professor Moody, he stood up and said calmly, "The 3 unforgivable curses are Imperius, Cruciatus and Avada Kedavra." Lin's dark red eyes looked directly into Professor Moody's eyes, as if he had seen through the layer of Polyjuice potion, and saw Barty Crouch Jr. underneath. Seeing Lin's calm dark red eyes, Professor Moody suddenly felt an inexplicable palpitation, and he quickly waved his hand to let Lin sit down. After Lin said the names of the 3 unforgivable curses at once, Professor Moody also omitted the link of continuing to ask questions to everyone. He poured out a spider from a glass bottle, used the spider as an experimental subject, and showed everyone the 3 unforgivable curses one by one. As the green light lit up in the dim defense against the dark arts classroom, the spider on the podium completely lost its vitality. Looking at this horrifying scene, the eyes of the young wizards in the classroom, except for those like Lin and Irving who had already learned the 3 unforgivable curses, all showed fear. Well, for the rest of this class, I will cast the Imperius curse on each of you to demonstrate the power of this black magic, and see if you can resist its influence. After killing the spider with the killing curse, Professor Moody looked at everyone coldly and announced. Originally, he planned to start the course of casting the Imperius curse on everyone next week, but Lin's answer saved him a lot of time, which also gave him extra time to carry out this part of the class. Hearing Professor Moody's words, everyone present except Lin was shocked. Irving even stood up and objected. "Professor Moody, as a retired auror of the Ministry of Magic, you should know that it is illegal to use the 3 unforgivable curses on wizards, right? What's more, we are all underage wizards. If you do this, you may be sentenced to life imprisonment in Azkaban prison." Hearing this, Professor Moody sneered and said, "So what? Dumbledore wants you to feel it. If you are willing to learn in a more cruel way, wait for others to read this black magic to you, and completely control you in the palm of their hands. That's great. I agree. You can go," Professor Moody said, pointing to the door of the classroom. Irving was silent. He finally understood what the golden pocket watch that Lin had given him before was used for. If he was controlled by the Imperius curse and did something in the classroom that was inconsistent with his usual style, then he would be really embarrassed. Chapter 293 Take off your damn alchemy equipment. As Professor Moody finished speaking, the classroom fell into silence. After a while, several Slytherin wizards stood up and left angrily, while most of the other wizards shrank in their seats like quails. Only Lin, Irving and a few experienced wizards could sit in their seats calmly. After watching the Slytherin wizards leave, Professor Moody closed the door and sneered, "I don't need some short-sighted guys in my class. I declare that from today on, those students who leave this classroom are not qualified to take my class again." In fact, those Slytherin wizards who left this classroom did not plan to come to Professor Moody's class again, just like they missed Lockhart's class 2 years ago. Except for the first class of that school year, they did not attend again. In the eyes of these Slytherin wizards, the professors they hired at home taught better than Professor Moody. At least those professors they hired themselves would not use the unforgivable curse on them. At this time, Professor Moody asked the little wizards to walk to the podium and accept his imperious curse. Under the control of the imperious curse, these little wizards all made strange movements. Some little wizards jumped onto the podium and screamed like monkeys. Some little wizards hit the floor with their heads like ostriches, and some little wizards sang in the classroom without caring about their image under the control of the imperious curse, causing others to plug their ears with their fingers. As time passed, only Lin and Irving were left in the classroom, who had not been cast the imperious curse. Irving glanced at Lin beside him, and after receiving the other party's affirmative look, he walked up to the podium and looked directly at Professor Moody. Soul out of the body. Professor Moody waved his wand at Irving without hesitation and whispered. In an instant, Irving felt that the thoughts in his mind were swept away, all worries and unhappiness disappeared, leaving only a hazy, light joy. He felt that he was more relaxed than ever before, as if the whole person was relaxed. Seeing Irving's eyes become dull, Professor Moody nodded secretly, thinking that his imperious curse had taken effect. He had an idea and planned to control Irving to jump onto the podium. However, when Professor Moody gave the order in his mind, the golden pocket watch hanging on Irving's waist emitted a faint light, and Irving, who had been in a daze, suddenly woke up. Seeing everything in front of him, Irving suddenly felt a sense of fear. Although the golden pocket watch shielded him from the control of the imperious curse, the feeling of his consciousness leaving his body and the sudden command in his mind made Irving palpitate. If he didn't have this golden pocket watch, he would probably have to jump onto the podium like a monkey and lose all his face. Seeing that Irving was not controlled by his imperious curse, Professor Moody could not help but show a look of surprise. He did not notice the faint light emitted by the golden pocket watch on Irving's waist. He thought that Irving had resisted the effect of the imperious curse with his own willpower, just like he did on the night of the Quidditch World Cup. Well, that's more like it. Look, everyone. Farley resisted the imperious curse. Professor Moody asked Irving to return to his seat, and he said loudly to everyone. After Irving, the only one who had not been subjected to the imperious curse in the classroom, Lin, walked up to the podium. Lin stood opposite Professor Moody with an expressionless face, and his dark red eyes seemed to flash with a hint of coldness. At this time, Professor Moody looked at Lin, and the corners of his mouth could not help but curl up slightly, revealing a grim smile. Professor Moody, oh no, it should be little Barty, was full of hatred for Lin. If it were not for Lin's forbidden magic fire, those Death Eaters would not have been killed so easily by Irina. When Barty Jr. thought about the death and arrest of those Death Eaters, how his master would lose help after his resurrection, he hated Lin from the bottom of his heart. Now, he had a chance to cast the imperious curse on Lin openly. How could he not be happy? Exclamation mark. This time, he must make this damned little wizard suffer a lot. Thinking of this, Barty Jr.'s eyes were full of excitement. Soul out of the body. Professor Moody pointed his wand at Lin's head and shouted. Just as Professor Moody was looking forward to the power of the imperious curse entering Lin's mind and controlling Lin's actions, a bright golden light bloomed on a pendant on Lin's chest. Then, Professor Moody felt a huge force hitting his chest, knocking him flying backwards. In the eyes of the other young wizards in the classroom, the pendant on Lin En's chest shot out a golden beam of light as thick as an adult's arm. The golden beam of light suddenly hit Professor Moody's chest and took his body flying. It was not until Professor Moody's body hit the wall on the other side of the classroom heavily and shook the whole classroom that the golden beam of light dissipated. At this time, a touch of red appeared at the corner of Professor Moody's mouth. He felt that his internal organs were in great pain, and he didn't know how many ribs were broken. He looked at Lin En, who was standing there without being affected at all, and there was a look of fear in his eyes. What kind of power is that? Professor Moody asked, holding back the pain, and when he spoke, a lot of blood foam flew out of his mouth. On the podium, Lin En smiled and said, sorry, Professor Moody. I'm an alchemist, and I'm equipped with a lot of alchemical equipment that I made on a daily basis. One of them is an alchemical equipment used to resist black magic and various curses. I forgot to take it off. Although Lin En was apologizing to Professor Moody, neither Professor Moody nor the little wizards under the podium could see any apology from Lin En's smiling face. Instead, they could see a bit of gloating. Professor Moody looked at Lin En hatefully, and he gritted his teeth and said, "Roll, take off your damn alchemical equipment. I want you to face the Imperious Curse with your own ability, just like Furley." Irving, who was used as a positive example by Professor Moody, showed an embarrassed smile. He couldn't tell the other party that he was wearing alchemical equipment, right? Chapter 294. The professor is gone. Get out of class is over. Hearing this, Lin En's face turned cold, and he said calmly, "Why should I take it off? Even if I stand here motionless and let you attack me with the Imperious Curse, you can't do anything to me, let alone those ants who can only attack in the dark." Professor Moody was choked with words for a moment, unable to refute Lin En's words. Just as Lin En said, the other person stood there and let him attack, and he couldn't control him with the Imperious Curse, but was beaten half to death by the golden beam, let alone those dark wizards who attacked in the dark. Professor Moody was about to bite his teeth off. He just wanted to take the opportunity to take revenge on this damn little wizard. Why is it so difficult? If I'm not mistaken, this kind of alchemical equipment that can resist the unforgivable curse should be disposable, right? You can resist the opponent's attack once. Can you resist it countless times? There is only a thief who can steal for 1,000 days, but there is no reason to guard against thieves for 1,000 days. Unless you can resist the power of the Imperious Curse with your own will, it will be futile to rely on more external forces. Professor Moody looked at the pendant on Lin En's chest that had completely dimmed, and said with a specious reason. Hearing Professor Moody's words, Lin En shrugged his shoulders and chuckled and said, "You can try it." As he said that, Lin En opened his arms and signaled Professor Moody to attack him at will. Seeing this scene, Professor Moody's face became fierce. Since Lin En said so, it means that Lin En must have other alchemical equipment that can resist the Imperious Curse. But even if he has 2 or 3, it is impossible that there are dozens or hundreds of them, right? Bet. Professor Moody shouted in his heart, waved his wand again, and said, "Soul out of the body." However, a familiar golden light shone on Lin's body again, and this time the golden light was on a bracelet on Lin's right hand. The dazzling golden light once again burst out a golden beam, and once again shot Professor Moody into the wall. Under the bombardment of this golden beam, half of Professor Moody's body was embedded in the wall, and a lot of the wall skin of this whole wall also fell off with a violent vibration. Suppressing the unbearable pain coming from his body, Professor Moody waved his wand continuously, shouting in disbelief, "Soul out of the body. Soul out of the body. Soul out of the body." Professor Moody shouted the spell of the Imperious Curse 3 times in a row, which shows how deep his obsession with controlling Lin is. But the reality did not match his wish. Under Professor Moody's desperate gaze, bright golden light shone on Lin's left wrist, waist and the hem of his wizard robe. 3 golden beams that Professor Moody was so familiar with broke through the air at the same time, blasting Professor Moody's skin to pieces and shattering all the bones in his body. If it weren't for the magic power that surpassed the elite auras that allowed him to forcibly maintain his life, I'm afraid this body would have died under this horrific injury. How many of these alchemical equipment do you have? Professor Moody collapsed on the ground, blood constantly oozing out of his mouth, and he couldn't move below his neck. Hearing Professor Moody's words, Lin smiled slightly, stretched out his hand to untie his wizard robe, and spread it out to both sides. Then, all the little wizards in the classroom saw the densely packed metal pieces that were attached to the inside of Lin En's wizard robe. Each metal piece seemed to be engraved with strange patterns and had a faint light flashing. The 2 metal pieces near the waist and hem of Lin En's wizard robe dimmed and lost their original luster. Obviously, these metal pieces that were attached to Lin En's wizard robe were the alchemical equipment that Lin En mentioned. And there were more than 100 metal pieces attached to this wizard robe. Puff. After seeing more than 100 metal pieces on the inside of Lin En's wizard robe, Professor Moody was so angry that he spat out a blood arrow. The blood arrow sprayed several meters away and spanned half of the classroom. After spitting out this blood, Professor Moody fainted under the dual effects of severe injury and rage. What are you still standing there for? Why don't you go to the hospital ward and ask Madame Pomfrey to come over? Seeing Professor Moody fainted, Lin was startled and told Irving under the podium. Although Lin wanted to teach little Barty a lesson, he didn't really want him to die. It would be a small matter if little Barty died, but if it affected their future plans, it would be a big deal. Before he and Harry were teleported to Little Hangleton village by the portkey, little Barty couldn't die. Oh, okay. Irving nodded in a daze, and he got up and ran towards the direction of the hospital ward. After watching Irving leave, Lin looked at Professor Moody, and a hint of disgust appeared in his dark red eyes. He waved his wand and threw a most basic healing spell to keep the other party alive. Lin En turned around and looked at the little wizards under the podium, who were terrified and afraid to move like quails. He said unhappily, "What are you still looking at? Get out of class is over. The professor is gone. What are you still doing here?" Hearing Lin En's words, the little wizards fled the classroom like they were shocked. After the little wizards left, the news that Professor Moody was knocked unconscious by Lin Rowell, the hero who had saved Hogwarts Castle, spread in the castle. Those little wizards who had heard about what Lin En and Irina had done in the past were all wondering if Professor Moody had any tricks up his sleeve, and some little wizards who had taken Professor Moody's class but had not yet been cast the imperious curse by him were speaking up for Professor Moody. However, these little wizards who complained were a minority after all, and the contributions made by Lin and Irina were there, while Professor Moody had done nothing except teaching them a lesson, which made them restrain their voices. In fact, Lin didn't care about the opinions of the outside world, no matter who these little wizards supported. When the identity of Barty Crouch Jr. was revealed at the end of the school year, those little wizards who supported Professor Moody would naturally be slapped in the face. Why should he go to such lengths? Exclamation mark. As far as the current situation is concerned, he and Irina don't need to personally manage their own image. It is enough to just hand it over to the editors of the Daily Prophet who were won over by the royal family. When the Ministry of Magic takes action to control public opinion next year and the Pink Toad moves into Hogwarts Castle, it will be time for them to personally disrupt the situation. Please give me rewards and monthly tickets. Chapter 295. Professor Moody is Polyjuice Potion in disguise. After about 10 minutes, Madame Pomfrey, led by Iwin, walked into the classroom carrying a translucent box. "Professor Moody," Madame Pomfrey exclaimed, "with such serious injuries, you are still alive. It's really Merlin's blessing." With Madame Pomfrey's experience in treating patients, she only took a look at Professor Moody and saw his cracked skin and shattered bones. In addition to the injuries that were invisible to the naked eye, she thought it was a miracle that he was not dead. Madame Pomfrey walked forward quickly, poured several bottles of potion into Professor Moody's mouth that was constantly bleeding, and lifted his head with her hands to prevent the potion from being taken out by the gushing blood. These potions were all very advanced healing potions. Even Lin En, who had good grades in potion class, could only distinguish the bone spirit from these potions. After feeding Professor Moody the potion, Madame Pomfrey cast several different healing spells in succession, which managed to maintain Professor Moody's injuries and stop the blood from flowing out of his skin. But even so, after bleeding for more than 10 minutes, Professor Moody had already turned into a bloody man. If it weren't for Lin's use of the most basic healing spell to keep him alive, and Madame Pomfrey's blood replenishing potion, he would have died of excessive blood loss. After Professor Moody's injury stabilized, Madame Pomfrey wiped the sweat from her forehead and looked at Lin and Irving, the only ones left in the classroom, and asked, "What happened? Why did Professor Moody suffer such serious injuries?" Hearing this, Lin spread his hands and said, "Professor Moody used the imperious curse on me and was hit by the attack from the triggered alchemical equipment I was wearing. Originally, his injuries were not so serious, but he insisted on forcibly casting the spell on me, which is why he was beaten like this by the continuous attacks. Unlike the golden pocket watch that Lin gave Irving, that golden pocket watch only had the function of resisting the control effect of the Imperious curse on the soul, but had no ability to attack. It could only be regarded as a very good offensive all-chemical equipment. The all-chemical equipment that Lin carried with him at all times was a combination of offense and defense. The pendant worn on Lin's neck and the more than 100 metal pieces in the wizard robe were all chemical equipment with a shield counter effect. After being attacked by a designated type of attack, they can release the stored attacks in the same trajectory, and the golden beam that seriously injured Professor Moody was the attack stored by Lin in these metal pieces. In fact, these metal pieces and Irving's golden pocket watch have the same underlying logic, that is, to resist the attack of the Imperious curse, and the reason why they are stronger than the golden pocket watches, that Lin added those all-chemical arrays with properties such as shield counter on their original basis. This also means that, even if the attacks in these metal pieces are released, they still have the basic performance of resisting the Imperious curse, and this effect of resisting the Imperious curse is unlimited. Of course, this kind of metal piece is not unsolvable. They can only resist a designated type of spell other than the death curse. Before coming to this classroom, Lin used his foresight in the plot to predict what might happen today, so he set the type of spell that the metal piece can resist to the Imperious curse. Assuming that Professor Moody attacked Lin with other spells, the defense of these metal pieces would be useless. If Professor Moody, or Barty Jr., knew about this, he would probably be so angry that he would die. Lin couldn't help but smile when she thought of this. What? Professor Moody actually used the unforgivable curse on you? How dare he? Madame Pomfrey exclaimed when she heard Lin's words, and the huge shock made her hands tremble unconsciously, and the magic power that maintained the healing spell was interrupted for a moment. The wound on Professor Moody's body that was originally healing opened again, and blood flowed out of the wound again. Seeing this, Madame Pomfrey quickly waved her wand and increased the strength of the healing spell, which made up for the previous mistake. Lin shook her head indifferently and said, I don't know, but you can ask Professor Dumbledore. After all, Professor Dumbledore is the principal of Hogwarts School of Witchcraft and Wizardry. I believe he will know something. Madame Pomfrey nodded slightly and said, I understand. I will talk to Professor Dumbledore. It is ridiculous to release the unforgivable curse on the little wizard. If Madame Pomfrey was not a doctor and Professor Moody was a professor at Hogwarts Castle, there might be some hidden truth in this matter. Otherwise, she would probably terminate Professor Moody's treatment directly in anger. By the way, it's almost time for dinner now, right? You can go to the hall to eat first, and leave this to me. Madame Pomfrey said kindly to Lin and Irving. Hearing Madame Pomfrey's words, Lin and Irving both nodded and left the classroom. After walking out of the classroom and coming to the corridor, Irving looked at Lin with some concern and asked, Lin, you beat Professor Moody so badly, isn't that a problem? What if he finds Professor Dumbledore and wants to expel you? After all, there has never been a professor beaten so badly by a student in the castle that he is on the verge of death. Hearing this, Lin smiled and said, don't worry, if Professor Dumbledore knew about it, he would probably applaud. After the lunch, come to the room of requirement. I plan to tell you something. As early as that day, when Irving joined Lin's gang, Lin told him about the room of requirement. Irving didn't understand what Lin said. How could Professor Dumbledore not be angry but happy when a professor of his own school was beaten so badly by a student that he was on the verge of death? Exclamation mark. However, Irving didn't refute anything. He nodded slightly and walked towards the auditorium with Lin. He understood that what Lin was going to tell him in the room of requirement after lunch must be related to what happened in class today, and it was something extremely secretive that could not be known to outsiders. Otherwise, there was no need for the other party to bring him to the room of requirement for fear of being heard. After lunch, Lin also called Irina, and the three of them went to the room of requirement together. In fact, the Professor Moody standing in front of us now is disguised by Polyjuice Potion, and the other party's true identity is the Death Eater Barty Crouch Jr. Walking into the room of requirement in the form of a conference room, Lin said to Irving in a deep voice, Chapter 296. Wait till night and put a sack on him and beat him up. How is this possible? Hearing Lin's words, Irving couldn't help but exclaimed. He couldn't imagine that Professor Moody in the classroom was actually a Death Eater who used Polyjuice potion to pretend to be a fake. But if this was true, how could Professor Dumbledore, a demon-level wizard, not notice it? Exclamation mark. Wait. According to what Lin said before, if Professor Dumbledore knew that Professor Moody was seriously injured and dying, he would applaud. Could it be that Professor Dumbledore already knew the true identity of Barty Jr. and didn't expose it? Exclamation mark. Irving thought about it and was terrified. He said incredulously, if that's the case, why didn't Professor Dumbledore reveal Crouch's identity? I don't think he would tolerate a Death Eater staying in Hogwarts Castle and posing a threat to the little wizard. At this time, Irina stepped forward and explained softly, in fact, this involves a plan, and the existence of Barty Crouch Jr. is an important factor in this plan. Since you are one of us, there is no need for us to hide this plan from you. As she spoke, Irina told Irving about Barty Crouch Jr.'s plan to resurrect Voldemort, and their plan to counter the plan. After learning the full picture of the plan, Irving felt numb all over, and his worldview seemed to have been washed away. In other words, you want to resurrect Voldemort? Irving's lips and teeth moved slightly, and he collapsed in his chair, feeling that his brain's CPU was overloaded. Lin nodded slightly and said, yes, rather than letting Voldemort's Horcruxes revive in various unknown places and bring trouble to the British wizarding world, it is better to let Voldemort's body be resurrected under control. Irving asked, so, what you said at the opening dinner night, that I would have a chance to face the resurrected Voldemort, could it be that day? On the side, Irina smiled and said, haven't you guessed it? After Lin and Harry are transported away by the portkey, modified by Barty the Young, it will be our turn to act. You and I will cooperate with Professor Dumbledore to capture and kill Barty the Young Crouch, and then use apparition to support Lin. At that time, it will be time for you to face Voldemort. Hearing Irina's words, Irving's expression became heavy. He thought that, even if he had to face Voldemort, it would be in an unknown number of years, but Irina told him that the time would be this year. But he is only a 5th grade wizard now. No wonder Lin En asked him to master the Thunderfall before this year's OWL exam. If he had an ancient magic, he would indeed have more self-protection ability. But even if it is the ability to protect himself, it depends on who the target is. Facing Voldemort, a demon-level wizard, even if the opponent may fall in realm after resurrection, it is definitely not something that a 5th-year wizard like him who has not even reached the level of an elite aura can contend with. In front of such a powerful enemy, let alone an ancient magic, even if he has 100 ancient magics, it is not too much. As if aware of Irving's worry, Lin En patted Irving on the shoulder and said with a smile, don't worry, Irina and Professor Dumbledore will be the main force against Voldemort at that time. I asked you to come here just to give you a chance to experience it. Hearing this, Irving nodded and his complexion improved a lot. After discussing the identity of Barty Crouch Jr. and the end of school year plan, Lin adjusted the room of requirement to a training ground and then instructed Irving on the spot. In terms of other spells, Irving might be much inferior to Lin, but in terms of weather spells, even Lin and Irina felt a little ashamed. Although Lin and Irina could cast simple weather spells without a wand, they could not make the room full of dark clouds or even thunder without a wand. But Irving did it. Without a wand, he could even simply control the dark clouds to drop thunder towards a designated area. Irving, you are really a genius in weather spells. I think your family's ancient magic of thunder is perfect for you to learn. Lin said in amazement as he looked at Irving manipulating thunder not far away. Even though Lin's weather spell was not yet able to be cast silently and without a wand, he had a certain understanding of this technique as he could cast many magic spells silently and without a wand. Therefore, under Lin's guidance, Irving made rapid progress in the silent and wandless casting of weather spells. When the three of them left the room of requirement, Irving had already been able to cast the weather spell silently and without a wand, while silently reciting the spell in his mind. When Irving no longer needed to recite the spell in his mind and could cast the weather spell with just a thought, it was time for him to reach the threshold of practicing the ancient magic of Thunderfall. After leaving the room of requirement, Irving went outside the castle first. He planned to go to the Forbidden Forest to continue practicing his weather spell and strive to start learning Thunderfall as soon as possible. Irina returned to the Gryffindor dormitory to take care of the magical animals in the suitcase. Originally, Irina's first big class in the afternoon was Professor Moody's Defense Against the Dark Arts class, but after Professor Moody was seriously injured and dying by Lin's alchemical equipment, this class was cancelled. After all, even if the director of St. Mungo's Hospital for Magical Maladies and Injuries came to treat Professor Moody together with Madame Pomfrey, it would be impossible for him to recover in just 2 hours. As for Lin, after leaving the room of requirement, he turned around and walked towards the principal's office not far away. Although Lin was sure that Dumbledore would not blame him for this matter, the news that a professor in the castle was seriously injured and dying by a student would eventually have some bad effects. He still had to explain the situation to Dumbledore and express his attitude. When he came to the stone statue outside the principal's office, Lin took out her needix list and read it one by one. When he read Bibby multi-flavored beans, the stone statue stepped aside and made way for the principal's office. So, Lin followed the spiral staircase to the principal's office and walked in. After knocking on the door, Professor Dumbledore. Lin En greeted Dumbledore. Dumbledore looked at Lin En helplessly and said, "Lin En, even if you want to beat him up, there's no need to be so blatant, right? You can at least wait until night and put a sack on him and beat him. Tell me, what kind of thing is it to beat up a professor in front of the whole class?" Chapter 297. If only Snape's greasy hair could be washed clean. Hearing Dumbledore's words, Lin En couldn't help but twitch his mouth. He thought Dumbledore would blame him for beating the professor in public, but in fact, Dumbledore did mention this matter, but he never expected that Dumbledore would instigate him to put Professor Moody in a sack in the middle of the night. If Lin En didn't know that the authority of Hogwarts Castle was controlled by the principal and other people could not directly enter the principal's office without permission, Lin En would probably suspect that the Dumbledore in front of him was someone else's disguise using Polyjuice Potion. It's wrong for me to beat him up like this in front of my classmates, but there's no need to put him in a sack in the middle of the night, right? What if he gets scared away? Lin En said with his mouth twitching wildly. Hearing this, a smile appeared in the corners of Dumbledore's eyes. He sat down behind his desk and raised his wand. "I'm just making a small suggestion. It's of course up to you whether to do it or not. Black tea or coffee?" Lin En shrugged. He sat down opposite Dumbledore and said, "Black tea." Dumbledore waved his wand gently, and a cup of black tea with hot white mist appeared in front of Lin En. After Lin En raised his teacup and took a sip, Dumbledore asked casually, "The Triwizard Tournament will begin soon. Are you ready?" Lin En smiled and raised his cup to indicate, "If you mean to break the alchemical restriction on the Goblet of Fire, then I think I'm ready." If it were any other alchemist, it would be as difficult as ascending to heaven to break Dumbledore's alchemical restriction, because they didn't even know what the alchemical array made by Dumbledore looked like. They could only make their own alchemical array with a breaking effect, and then collide with Dumbledore's alchemical array with their own alchemical array to completely destroy it. However, if an alchemical array made by a Demon King level wizard had an alchemical array with energy storage and counter-attack functions added to it, it would be enough to stop other alchemists. After all, no alchemist below the Demon King level wizard could consume the magic power stored in the alchemical array of a Demon King level wizard. But Lin En was an exception. He had learned the secret method from Nicholas Flamel and could make the alchemical array hidden inside the alchemical creation appear. This also meant that Lin En could break or even learn the other party's alchemical array by observing the other party's alchemical array. As early as 3 years ago, Lin En used this method to learn many alchemical arrays that he could not touch from the Mirror of Verized, which also laid a solid foundation for him to learn the illusion array this year. In the Mirror of Verized 3 years ago, Lin En had learned 3 alchemical arrays with the main attributes of Capture the Spirit, Illusion and Lost. When Lin En was refining the illusion array, he connected these 3 alchemical arrays to the original system of the illusion array. The reason why Green almost got lost after entering Lin En's illusion array during the summer vacation was not only the reality of the illusion itself and Green's unforgettable memory of that incident, but also the alchemical array with the main attribute of Lost. could be said to have made great contributions. Therefore, when facing the alchemy array that had been presented to him, Lin En did not need to fight against the stone with an egg like other alchemists. He could directly learn the alchemy array on the alchemy ban and reverse analyze it to make it disintegrate. This is also the confidence of Lin En when facing Dumbledore. After Lin En left the principal's office, the next time passed slowly. After Professor Moody recovered from his injuries, he returned to the classroom. Because Madame Pomfrey talked to Dumbledore alone, Professor Moody was warned not to cast the unforgivable curse on the young wizards. This prevented the young wizards in Irina's class from being tortured by the imperious curse. Instead, after Professor Moody finished the demonstration of the 3 unforgivable curses, he hastily ended this type of class and began to get down to business. Soon, the time came to mid to late October. When everyone came to the lobby on this day, they found the huge title on the notice, erected at the foot of the marble stairs. True Wizard Tournament. Representatives from Bogsbuttons and Durmstrang will arrive at 6 PM on Friday, October 30th. Classes will end half an hour early that afternoon. Students are requested to return their school bags and textbooks to their dormitories and gather in front of the castle to greet our guests and attend the welcome banquet. A young wizard read out the content of the notice, which excited most of the young wizards around. The notice in the entrance hall had a significant impact on the young wizards in Hogwarts Castle. In the following week, people in the castle seemed to talk about only one topic, the True Wizard Tournament. Various rumors spread quickly among the young wizards, like highly contagious bacteria, and most of the content they spread was about who would compete to become the champion of Hogwarts School of Witchcraft and Wizardry, what events would be in the tournament, and what the young wizards of Bogsbuttons and Durmstrang were different from them. In addition, during this week, the castle seemed to be undergoing a major cleaning. Several dirty portraits were scrubbed clean, which made the scrubbed characters very dissatisfied. They sat in the frames, humming sullenly, and every time they touched the newly exposed pink tender flesh on their faces, they grimaced in pain. The armor in the castle suddenly became shiny, and they no longer creaked when they moved. Seeing the brand new castle, Irina heard Ron always muttering something, if only Snape's oily hair could be washed clean. On the morning of October 30th, when the young wizards went downstairs for breakfast, they found that the hall had been decorated overnight. Huge silk banners were hung on the walls around, each representing a Hogwarts college. Among them, the red background with a golden lion was Gryffindor, the blue background with a bronze eagle was Ravenclaw, the yellow background with a black badger was Hufflepuff, and the green background with a silver python was Slytherin. Behind the teacher's seat, there was a large banner with the Hogwarts crest, a lion, an eagle, a badger, and a snake connected together, surrounding the capital H of Hogwarts School of Witchcraft and Wizardry. Soon, with the end of the last class in the afternoon, all the teachers and students in the castle came to the auditorium together. Under the leadership of the professors, everyone walked down the steps in an orderly manner and lined up in front of the castle. It was a cold, fresh evening, night was falling, and a white translucent moon was hanging over the Forbidden Forest. If you're listening to this novel on a channel other than Fanfic World, it means they downloaded and uploaded it without effort. We cordially invite you to visit our channel, Mundo Fanfic Novelos. There you'll find the original version of this story and you can explore many other novels of various genres. We're waiting for you to immerse yourself in a world of incredible novels. Chapter 298 Bogsbuttons and Durmstrang. The sky gradually darkened, and all the teachers and students were waiting outside the castle, but they could only wait for the cold wind that kept blowing on them. They guessed what kind of transportation the two magic schools would take to arrive, in order to kill time. But as time went by, the little wizards gradually became impatient. Just when there was about to be some commotion in the team, Dumbledore, who was standing in the back row with other professors, shouted, If I'm not mistaken, the representative of Bogsbuttons School of Magic has arrived." Before Dumbledore's voice fell, everyone followed his gaze and looked into the distance. Above the Forbidden Forest, a huge monster was rapidly passing through the deep blue sky, flying towards the direction of Hogwarts Castle, and quickly enlarged in everyone's vision. Looking at the huge monster in the sky, a first-year student screamed and guessed, "It's the fire dragon." "Don't talk nonsense. It's a house flying," Dennis Creevy from Gryffindor retorted. In fact, Dennis's guess was closer to the answer than the freshman's. As the black behemoth flew over the treetops of the Forbidden Forest, illuminated by the lights from the castle windows, everyone saw a huge powder blue carriage flying towards them. The powder blue carriage was as big as a house, and it was pulled into the air by 12 winged horses, all of which were silver-maned horses, each of which was about the size of an elephant. At this time, the powder blue carriage flew lower, and it was descending at an extremely fast speed. With a loud sound that shook the earth, the horses' hooves banged to the ground, each of which was as big as a dinner plate. In the blink of an eye, the powder blue carriage also landed on the ground, shaking on its huge wheels, while the golden horses shook their huge heads and their big red eyes rolled around. There was a crest on the door of the pink carriage, with 2 golden crossed wands, and 3 stars on each wand. Obviously, the pattern on the crest was the emblem of Bogsburton's School of Magic. Not long after, the door was opened, and a young wizard in a light blue robe jumped out of the carriage. He bent down, fumbled for something on the floor of the carriage, and opened a golden spiral staircase. He jumped back respectfully, and made a pleased gesture, and a woman with a figure comparable to Hagrid came out of the carriage. In the crowd, Lin's expression moved slightly. He naturally knew this tall woman. The other party was Madame Maxim, the principal of Bogsburton's School of Magic. As early as the summer vacation of his first grade, his teacher Green took him to visit his alma mater, and he also met Madame Maxim at that time. Seeing Madame Maxim appear, Dumbledore immediately clapped his hands, and the young wizards below also clapped their hands. Many people stood on tiptoe to see Madame Maxim more clearly. Madame Maxim walked in front of Dumbledore, her face relaxed. She smiled elegantly, and stretched out a glittering hand. Dumbledore gently kissed her hand as a courtesy. "Dear Madame Maxim," Dumbledore said with a smile, "welcome to Hogwarts School of Witchcraft and Wizardry." Madame Maxim responded, "Dumbledore, I hope everything is well with you." "Very good, thank you," Dumbledore said. "My students." Madame Maxim introduced. She raised her hand, and waved behind her nonchalantly. Behind Madame Maxim, about 12 or 13 young wizards, both men and women, had gotten off the carriage. Judging from their appearance, they were about 18 or 19 years old, and they were all trembling slightly. This was not surprising. Although France was not too far from England, the climates of the two places were slightly different. The robes of these little wizards seemed to be made of fine silk, and no one wore a cloak. Some little witches were so cold that they wrapped their heads with scarves or headscarves. After the two sides met, Dumbledore asked Madame Maxim to take the little wizards of Bogsburton's School of Magic into the castle's hall to rest. Before going to the castle, Madame Maxim also told Dumbledore that her magic horse only drank single malt whiskey. Shortly after the delegation of Bogsburton's School of Magic entered the castle, the delegation of Durmstrang's School of Magic also arrived. A loud and strange sound floated towards them from the darkness. It was a suppressed rumbling and sucking sound, like a huge vacuum cleaner moving along the riverbed. In the Black Lake, Lee Jordan shouted, pointing at the lake. "Look at the lake." Standing on the gentle slope of the lawn overlooking the entire site, they could clearly see that the originally calm surface of the Black Lake had suddenly become no longer calm. There was a slight commotion under the water in the center of the Black Lake, and huge splashes of water appeared on the surface of the lake. The surging waves hit the wet shore, and then, right in the center of the lake, a large whirlpool appeared, as if a huge plug had been suddenly pulled out of the bottom of the lake. A long black pole-like object slowly rose from the center of the whirlpool, followed by the sail rigging, which looked like a mast. The big ship gradually rose out of the water, and gleamed in the moonlight. The big ship looked strange, with a skeleton-like appearance, as if it was the remains of a sunken ship that had just been salvaged. The portholes of the big ship flickered with a dim misty light, looking like the eyes of a ghost. Finally, with a loud splash, the ship emerged completely, bobbing on the choppy water and beginning to make its way toward the shore. A moment later, with a plop, an anchor was dropped into the shallow water, and with another snap, a plank was laid on the shore. As the wizards on the ship stepped onto the shore and walked along the lawn into the light from the entrance hall, the crowd could see what they looked like. They were all tall and wore fur cloaks with tangled fur. However, the fur on the adult wizard who led them to the castle was a different kind, silvery white, soft, and smooth, like his hair. Dumbledore The adult wizard came up to Dumbledore and called out enthusiastically, "My dear old friend, how are you?" Dumbledore smiled and replied, "Excellent, thank you, Professor Karkaroff." Chapter 299, Eating the Melon and Eating It on Your Own Head. After receiving the delegation from Durmstrang School of Magic, Dumbledore led the two groups to the castle. During this process, many young wizards from Hogwarts found that Victor Crumb, the seeker of the Bulgarian Quidditch national team, was also in the delegation of Durmstrang School of Magic, which made them very excited. Some of them were even looking for quills in their pockets, hoping to get an autograph from Crumb. After entering the hall, the young wizards sat down one after another. Among them, the young wizards from Durmstrang School of Magic sat down at the Slytherin table, while the young wizards from Bogsburton School of Magic sat down at the Ravenclaw table. Just as the dinner was about to begin, a young witch from Bogsburton School of Magic suddenly stood up from her seat and walked towards the Slytherin table. As she walked towards the Slytherin table, she took off her thick scarf, and her long silver hair fell to her waist like a waterfall. Her blue eyes looked very beautiful, and her skin was as white as moonlight. At this time, Ron, who accidentally saw this girl, could not take his eyes away. His face was red, and he seemed to want to say something, but he was so excited that he could only make some ho-ho sounds. It was not until Ron's vision was only the back of the girl that he slowed down. He said hoarsely to Harry, Hermione and Irina beside him, "I bet she must be a Veela." Hearing this, Hermione retorted, "I don't think so," but no other boys stared at her like an idiot. In fact, Hermione was not absolute. On the way to the Slytherin table, many boys looked at her and couldn't take their eyes away. If I'm not mistaken, she should be a half Veela. Irina looked at the back of the girl with similar hair color to her and said so. If she remembered correctly, that girl should be Fleur Delacour, the champion of Bogsburton School of Magic in this Triwizard tournament. Irina watched Fleur's actions with interest, curious about what she was doing at the Slytherin table. But soon, her face changed suddenly. She never expected that she would eat the melon on her head. Fleur came to Lin with a smile on her face and sat down next to Lin. "Irina, that girl from Bogsburton seems." Hermione looked at Irina with hesitation. Irina stared at the direction of Lin and Fleur, but forced a smile on her face. Who knows, she may have something to do with Lin. At this time, at the Slytherin table, "Lin, I didn't expect it was really you. You said we would meet again 3 years ago, but I waited for you for a whole summer at Bogsburton School of Magic, but I didn't see you." Fearing sat down next to Lin, and she said to Lin with some resentment. She thought that, when Lin said they would meet again in 3 years, he meant that he would come to Bogsburton School of Magic to find her, so she didn't go home for a whole summer, fearing that she would miss Lin, but she didn't expect that Lin would stand her up. During the 3 years at Bogsburton School of Magic, she became more and more disappointed with her classmates. Those wizards stared at her like perverts because of their Veela bloodline, and those little witches hated her because of her Veela bloodline. This made her cherish Lin even more, a friend who was only a one-time encounter, but was not affected by her charm ability, and could make her feel equal. Hearing this, Lin En smiled and said, "I said we would meet in 3 years, but I didn't say we would meet at Bogsburton School of Magic. Look, we are meeting now." Fleur was stunned and asked, "You knew 3 years ago that the Triwizard tournament would be held in Hogwarts Castle?" Lin En shrugged, blinked, and said, "Secret." Seeing that Lin En was unwilling to tell her, Fleur turned her head away in a huff, but she turned back quickly, her eyes sparkling. "By the way, Lin En, my alchemy has made great progress in the past 3 years. That day, you used the airwave rune to make the silver sword emit sword energy, which gave me a lot of inspiration. It made me realize that the same alchemical rune may have many uses. For this reason, I have also developed many different uses for alchemical runes." Fleur said as she took a diamond ring off her finger and handed it to Lin En. Lin En raised his left hand, a golden light flashed, and the alchemical runes engraved on the diamond ring appeared one after another. By combining the resistance rune with the impact rune, the alchemical ring that was originally only used for defense has evolved into a counter-attack ability. It can release resistance to impact after being impacted, and has the effect of repelling the enemy. Not bad. Lin En smiled and nodded, returning the ring to Furin. "This ring is indeed something. Even if it is placed in the French magic world, where all chemical products are abundant, it can be sold at a very high price. If it were placed 3 years ago, this all-chemical ring that combines offense and defense would probably be coveted by even Lin En. But for Lin En now, it is a bit child's play. After all, Lin En has long upgraded from the use of all-chemical runes to the use of all-chemical arrays, and even the use of all-chemical arrays. These all-chemical rings are only made of 1 or 2 all-chemical arrays, and it is difficult for Lin En to value them as much as he did 3 years ago. After receiving Lin En's praise, Furing smiled with her eyes curved. She looked at Lin En curiously and said, "Lin En, I guess your alchemy has made great progress in the past 3 years, right? Can you show me the alchemy creations you have made recently?" Lin En hesitated for a moment, then reached his left hand into his wizard robe, took off a metal piece that was tightly attached to the wizard robe, and handed it to Furing. Feeling the powerful magic fluctuations emanating from this metal piece, even if Furing didn't know the function of this metal piece, she could be sure that this metal piece was definitely not an ordinary thing. Sure enough, under her curious gaze, Lin En explained the function of this metal piece. Carrying it on your body can resist the control of the Imperious Curse. At the same time, it stores a one-time offensive spell that will be released automatically when the wearer encounters the Imperious Curse for the first time. Its power can probably kill a giant monster in an instant. After hearing Lin En's introduction, Furing's eyes were dull. At the Gryffindor table, looking at Lin and Fleur who were almost close to each other in the distance, Irina felt that her eyes were blazing with fire. If you want to talk about something, just talk about it. Can you not get so close? And, Delica, what did you give Lin? Exclamation mark. Diamond ring, what on earth do you want to do? Exclamation mark. Thinking of this, an ice blade condensed by the power of ice suddenly appeared in Irina's right hand. Seeing this scene, Hermione's face suddenly showed horror. She quickly hugged Irina tightly and said loudly, "Calm down, Irina. It's not that bad. It's really not that bad." Chapter 300. She was the first to come. Irina's movements attracted the attention of the surrounding young wizards. They all looked at her in fear, fearing that she would swing a knife at them. Not far away, Lin and Fleur, who were discussing at the Slytherin table, were naturally attracted by the movement here. However, when Lin turned around and saw Irina's beautiful ice blue eyes staring at him fiercely, he broke out in a cold sweat. Lin quickly raised his hands to indicate that he was innocent. "What's wrong with her? But her appearance. Is she the same as me, too?" Fleur asked curiously when she saw Irina's unusual movements. After seeing Irina's appearance clearly, she couldn't help but ask aloud, but when she was about to say the 4 words Half-Blood Vila, she quickly restrained her voice. After all, there were many people here, and she didn't want the young wizards here to know her identity. Hearing Furing's words, Lin En smiled bitterly and said, "She is my best friend. She may be upset because she saw that we were too close. She is different from you. Her appearance features come from the power of magic, just like my dark red eyes and hair ends." Hearing this, Furing awkwardly moved to the side a little. She whispered, "Sorry, I didn't know she was your girlfriend." Lin En was stunned and said, "Don't get me wrong. Irina and I haven't. Anyway, don't talk nonsense." Although Lin En had a lot of good feelings for Irina, before the two sides really confirmed their relationship, if Furing spread the news that Irina was his girlfriend everywhere, it would have a lot of damage to Irina's reputation. Moreover, this would make people think that he and Irina were a couple. Whether Irina was interested in him or not, he hoped that the final decision would be made by her herself, rather than forced by people's instigation. Lin En didn't want this to happen to Irina. However, when Lin En's words fell into Furing's eyes, they changed to another meaning. In Fleur's eyes, Lin, who was not affected by her charm, was her best choice of partner. If Irina was Lin's girlfriend, it would be fine, but if Lin didn't have a partner, she wouldn't mind fighting for herself and becoming the other person's partner. The social atmosphere in France was very open, and so was the French magic world. With the pride of the Delica family, Fleur was naturally unwilling to find a man with a partner. But before Lin and Irina really confirmed their relationship, she believed that their opportunities were equal, and she had the right to fight for her own happiness. Thinking of this, Fleur moved back a little towards Lin. She ignored Irina's angry eyes and raised her head higher. "Don't stop me, let me kill them." Seeing this scene, Irina screamed in anger. Fortunately, Hermione hugged her tightly from behind, making her unable to move. Of course, this was also because Irina didn't really mean it. She was just angry for a while. Otherwise, under the power of the ice god, Hermione would not be able to hold her back. "Furung, how about we sit separately?" Lin En wiped the non-existent sweat on his forehead and said to Furung beside him. Furung said unconvincedly, "Why? Am I not as pretty as her, or what? Why do you want me to sit separately? I'm a guest now." Hearing this, Lin En was silent. If we compare the appearance of both parties, according to the aesthetics of Westerners, Furung is actually better. Furung and Irina both have beautiful silver hair. Irina has a pair of ice blue eyes, while Furung has a pair of azure blue eyes, which is harmless. The biggest difference between Furung and Irina in appearance may be their skin color. Irina's skin is very white, but it is the kind of healthy whiteness with a little wheat color, while Furung's skin is as white as moonlight, completely white, and also scary white. Furung's skin color is what Westerners yearn for, but for Lin En, who was an Oriental in his previous life, Irina's skin color is more in line with his aesthetics. PFFT, PFFT, PFFT. Lin En quickly shook off the distracting thoughts in his head. He had never been attracted to Irina because of her beauty, but his affection for her gradually developed after fighting side by side for a long time. Seeing that Lin En didn't speak, Furung couldn't help feeling a little wronged. Judging from Irina's age, unless Irina had known Lin En before entering school, she must have come after her. Damn it, she was obviously here first. Furung thought sadly. But seeing that Lin En stopped talking, Furung didn't want to make him angry because of her arrogance, so she had to move to the side silently, cast her eyes on the teacher's seat, and waited for the dinner to start. What happened here was just a small episode before the dinner. After seeing that Lin En and Furung finally sat separately, Irina also dispersed the ice blade in her hand and sat back in her seat. However, Irina's resentful eyes staring at Lin En's back always made Lin En feel numb on his back. Sweaty. Lin, who was caught in the crossfire, thought uncomfortably. He never expected that the scene of Irina and Fleur's first meeting would be like this. As time passed, the noisy dinner ended. At the teacher's table, Dumbledore stood up and said with a smile, "This moment has finally arrived. The True Wizard tournament is about to begin. I would like to explain a few words before bringing in the box. I want to explain the program of our activities this school year. However, first of all, please allow me to introduce two guests. This is Mr. Barty Crouch, Director of the International Cooperation Department of the Ministry of Magic." As Dumbledore's voice fell, Barty Crouch Sr. came to the middle of the hall, and sparse applause rang out in the hall. After seeing Barty Sr.'s arrival, Lin, who was sitting at the Slytherin table, nodded to him calmly. Barty Sr. noticed Lin at the Slytherin table, and he nodded slightly, which was considered a response to Lin. "This is Mr. Ludo Bagman, Director of the Department of Sports and Physical Education of the Ministry of Magic." Dumbledore continued. Perhaps because Ludo was once a batsman and had a better reputation among the young wizards, the young wizards gave him much more applause than old Barty. Ludo waved to thank the young wizards cordially, while old Barty stood there expressionlessly without any expression. Among the young wizards in this hall, except for Lin and Irina, there was probably no third person who could surprise old Barty, not even Harry, who was hailed as the savior. End of this chapter. Thank you very much for reaching the end. Don't forget to like. Looking for more exclusive content and immediate access? Subscribe to our Patreon. Remember, every like, subscription, or donation encourages us to continue. Thanks to everyone. See you in the next video.